Hello. We did it. We got another stream going. We got another stream going. Do. We got another stream going. Yeah, break it down. What? Yeah. Peaceful day for me, man. Peaceful day for me. I was going to do one of the graveyard walks today. So, to those who have been requesting it, it was raining. I don't know what to tell you. It was raining. Like, I had a whole thing planned. I was going to go do it. And it was raining. And honestly, I had such a sleepy day today. Boy, do I need a sleepy day today. Holy cow, man. Like, holy cow. I'm taking too many shifts. I'm doing too much of the capitalism, right? But gotta pay those bills, gotta pay those bills. If you don't pay those bills, you don't get to eat, you don't get shelter. And the rent's only going up. My rent got increased this month, right? The maximum amount that they're legally allowed to do so. And I'm pretty sure that if we continue moving on with these psychopaths, like, they'll just remove the rent cap raise, Like, here in the city of Toronto, you can only raise it by like 2% or something like that, right? They'll eventually do away with it. And then one day I'll get a notice and be like, oh, by the way, your rent doubled next month. I'm sure that's going to happen. Hey, Cotton, how you doing, bud? How you doing today? Lots and lots of... it's funny how it works, eh? Some days there's just literally nothing. It's just like people just kind of spinning their tires. Today, ton of articles, tons of things. So I think we'll be bouncing all over the place and talking about a lot of different things today. Just because there's lots of... Did you know that there's lots of shit going on in the world? Right? Did you know there's lots of shit going on in the world? And we're all trying to goddamn make sense of it, right? I love this Sarah Scribbles. How it feels to be alive lately, existing. That'll be $70. Okay. Like, why does being alive cost so much? Right? Why are we tolerating any of it? You guys know the reason why. So today, Bank of Canada increases policy interest rate by 50 basis points, continues quantitative tightening. Once again going after its own citizens, once again destroying the middle class, assaulting the middle class, should such a thing even exist, right? Making sure that your mom and dad can't afford their loans, like making sure that nobody can actually take out loans anymore, so that, billionaires can just keep pocketing more and more money for themselves, and then tell us that they're not going to apologize for their success, right? Like, there really just does come a point where we got to start having this serious and legitimate question of when is revolution not just a theory, but a moral imperative. Like, they are collapsing the economy on purpose. We're watching them do it. Sure, they're doing it slowly, right? They're not just jacking it up to 15-20% right away. But that's where it's going, right? That's where they're going. Tiffany's at it again. Yeah, good old Tiff Macklem. Don't you love it that we're being completely dominated by a guy with the name Tiff Macklem? Just like a total fucking faffy loser name. It's literally the name that they would give to, like, the jock villain in an 80s comedy. That's for real the name of like, the guy that comes on is just like, oh, it's these people. His name would be Tiff Macklem. Like, like, you can't write this shit. It's so fucking stupid. Matthias, good to see you. We are enslaved, that's why, yeah. Pretty basic. Pretty straightforward. I'm going through a situation right now where I'm watching someone who is really struggling with that reality, right? That their owners have come in and have essentially asserted their ownership, and have completely disregarded their their loyalty or the effort that they've put into the workplace or any of that kind of stuff. And they're really, really struggling with it. And I'm watching them struggle with it. And I just keep saying to them, like, bro, like, you are going to have to just let this go. Like, you're either going to have to let it go or you're just going to have to quit and go find new owners, right? Like, that's the situation that you're in. But it's really difficult watching somebody really struggle. Like, and it's really consuming them. Like, I see how it's consuming them and how it's adding a lot of stress to their life, that they're struggling with this concept that, like, how could someone come in and just completely disregard, like, the years of effort and the years of work that I've put into an establishment and into a place, and just completely push it away and completely ignore my effort and my position that I'm in. And it's like, because they're owners, dude. Like, they're capitalist owners. They're under no obligation to respect you. There's no system that is in place. Literally the only system, the only argument that the capitalist death cult can come up with for why we should bother respecting workers is, well, if you don't respect them, then they'll leave, right? But the capitalist death cult has arranged itself in such a way so that at the bottom of the hierarchy of the death cult is homelessness and poverty and desperation, right? So they've created a system that will drop you out the bottom and throw you onto the street, and which creates a perpetual incentive to have workers consistently reintegrate themselves into the death cult. So if these people leave, then someone else will come in, because and you want to make sure that you have a certain amount of unemployment in the society, right? The Federal Reserve literally admitted this like a month ago, like straight up just admission that we need unemployment, right? And so you have a pool of unemployed people who are desperate, right? A pool of homeless people who are like art pieces, like grim totems threatening people in the society, and so you can treat your workers however you like, because if they leave, you just replace them. And like once you attain a certain level of wealth, like once you're in the billionaire strata, like it doesn't matter to you. Just like, yeah, don't forget the foreign workers. Yeah, that's a really good point, Tinker. That's a really good point, right? Just create a system of slavery, like a literal system of slavery, right? That just allows you to be like, oh, I only need workers for like 3 months of the year, so we'll bring them in, pay them $6 an hour, throw them in a barracks, right? That's a slave. That might as well be a slave situation. They call it a slave situation. And then when you're done with them, you discard them, right? So you've got a lot of different things that are arrayed so that when owners come in, they can just act how they want. And the person that I'm watching right now deal with the reality of this is not accustomed to this, right? Like I feel like what I'm watching is I'm watching a person who used to be kind of in a middle class position slide down into the lower class and doesn't understand it and doesn't recognize it and doesn't realize it, and is interacting with ownership like previous owners were kind of on the same level as him, right? That like previous owners were like a guy who is starting this business because he believes in it and he wants to do it, and so he's working on it, and so he's invested his capital and he's brought in this guy to act as this kind of thing, right? And they're both kind of working through it, and so they're communicating with one another and trying to figure it out, right? And the relationship of owner and work and owned, owner and serf, right, wasn't so highlighted because everybody was invested in it, and the guy that owned it was also working in the establishment, right? So it's like the small business owner kind of situation. Well, these new guys that have come in, right? They just have infinite money, near as I can tell. They're certainly not going to work in the establishment, right? And they don't care what anybody thinks, right? And they're completely disincentivized to care. So, yeah, quantitative tightening, that's a fun way of saying it. Yep, that's what the death cult does. That's the religious ideology, right? That remember quantitative easing, right? Remember quantitative easing? Like literally they're creating languages in order to justify their theft and justify and to obfuscate the reality of what they're doing. That's all they do. Like, that's all they do. They're a non-scientific group of religious acolytes who are desperately trying to convince you that they have credibility and legitimacy when they don't. Like, what are you talking about? Quantitative tightening. Like, literally bankrupting people. That's what they're doing. They're just bankrupting people, and that's called quantitative tightening, right? Tighten your belt, like all that kind of psychopathic nonsense. That's because the capitalist hierarchy insists that you blame yourself for their own failings. Yeah, and then they turn around and gaslight you. Like, literally everything I just described, and then when the negative consequences of this death cult slave structure turn around and rear themselves on you, they literally hire someone like Jordan Peterson to gaslight you and to say it's your fault, right? You just need to work harder. Even though the system is structured to guarantee unemployment, to guarantee homelessness, and to guarantee slavery. It guarantees them. Like, it doesn't function if they don't have these things. And if you turn around and say, just scrabble harder, it's no different than saying to somebody who's drowning in a pool, just swim harder from your super yacht, right? Like, you're literally standing there with a lifeboat that you could just pull a lever and drop it into the water, but instead of doing that, you're going to scream, swim harder. Like, these people are psychopaths, and Nazis like Jordan Peterson is the tool they're using to gaslight people. Like, very straightforwardly. Like, he's a gaslighter. That's what they're doing. Adam, how you doing, bud? Sorry if you covered this yesterday. How'd the elections go? London got a sub, 22%. We got rid of the ones counselors for an NDP type. Got another Van Holst type in the ward. I mean, John Tory got back in, right? Like, not much in the way of shifting. Given the way that the Ford administration reconfigured how elections work in the city of Toronto, it basically guarantees incumbency forever. Like, when you have one city councillor for like 200,000 people, it's extremely difficult to organize against that. It's extremely difficult. And because the councillors really, at the end of the day, only respond to the loudest voices, and the loudest voices are always going to be the oligarchy, always. And the media apparatus is completely disincentivized to inform people of who is what and what is who, and there is no such thing as local media anymore. That's basically been blown up. And so you're in this situation where the people who do show up are showing up to essentially vote for the incumbent, because the incumbent is telling them, you get to keep your property taxes low, and I'll make sure the serfs are all in order, right? And so they're incentivized to actually go and vote. But everybody else is like, I don't know who anybody is. I don't know who and if you do know who anybody is, it's just some person off in the corner who's trying to like organize locally. So maybe they can get like 1,500 votes. Like, maybe they can get like a small amount of people being like, yeah, okay, like we'll go for you. But they don't have like a fucking megaphone that they can blare across the city constantly that competes with people like John Tory, who's literally like a Rogers executive. Like, the system is utterly rigged. Like, utterly rigged. And anybody who wants to... I said it yesterday, Adam, and I'll say it again, and anybody who wants to ask me about electoral politics, literally the only reason we should be engaging with electoral politics at this point is to show people how fraudulent it is. That's the only reason. Like, banish this concept from your mind. Banish this concept from your mind that you are going to organize a bunch of people together and you are going to elect someone, and that person will represent the people and actually move forward on goals that the people want. Banish that idea. It's gone. It doesn't exist. And if you invest yourself in that idea, you will constantly be demoralized. You will constantly be disappointed. You will constantly put yourself into a place of tune-out. You will constantly put your chips into somebody and dream a hope and have an idea, and you will constantly and consistently be disappointed. Because that's not how the system works anymore. It no longer has arrayed itself to respond rationally to crises or the populace. That's not what our electoral system is for. That's not what it does. So the only reason for us to engage in the electoral system, and we should, but the only reason to do it is to consistently show to the people how fraudulent the system is. That we are going to gather people, and the more people you can get coalesced and gathered underneath a person to try to push them through the electoral system, the more fraudulent it will become. And you take a look at how the NDP establishment stole the BC leadership race, right? One of the most illegitimate acts that has happened in Canadian politics, period. Period, right? Literally, this woman signs up a bunch of people, and the NDP basically says, oh, we're disqualifying you because you signed up a bunch of people. That's literally what happened. And so the electoral system across the board throughout Canada, the United States, has delegitimized itself and is continuing to delegitimize itself. And so the only reason to engage in the process is to show to the people how illegitimate the system is. So that the people understand that, oh, what we actually need to do now is surround the halls of power and foment a revolution. Because there is no alternative. There is no alternative. And you're not engaging in the system to change it from within. You're engaging in the system to show everybody how impossible that actually is. And the lengths that they're willing to go. What the NDP basically did here in this election was outright say that democracy doesn't matter. Flat out. This is an act of virulent fascism. Virulent fascism. Literally saying to the opposition, you do not get to run. The only thing that's above this in terms of anti-democratic action is a straight assassination. It's literally the only other thing they could have done that would have been worse, right? So they just straight up said, nope, you don't get to participate in democracy because we say so. The system is illegitimate. There's no reason to engage in it outside of showing everyone how illegitimate the system is. And eventually, if we coalesce enough energy and we get enough people and we actually begin pushing through, they'll start assassinating people. There's no two ways about it. We're ruled by psychopaths. The people who are ruling us are psychopathic. They will assassinate people. But now they're getting to a point where they don't have to assassinate people because they can literally just say, nah, you don't get to run. Really? That's what we watched. Right? That's what we watched. Imagine if in the conservative race, Pierre Poilievre won the 80% of the vote. He won an overwhelming victory. And then Jean Charest said, no, you're disqualified. And they just appointed Jean Charest. Right? How is that any different than what we're watching here? Right? It's just that, Pierre Poilievre is on side, so they're not going to bother with doing that. But, the concept that we live in a democracy is a joke. We don't need to pretend otherwise. And we shouldn't set ourselves up for failure and live in a fantasy world anymore. That our goal is not to elect people into positions of power who will respond rationally to the citizenry. Our goal is to surround their houses, to foment revolution, and reinstate democracy in the society. That's the goal. Because right now we're not a democracy. Under no definition, under no circumstances, if you think we're a democracy, you're deluding yourself. You're absolutely delusional. Santa is real, I'm the great Napoleon. on that same level, if you genuinely think that that we are a democracy. Zed, good to see you, bud. My partner gave me a worksheet from her work about being more productive. Oh yeah, great. It just explained how you need to stop thinking and do more action. Yeah, aka quick wins. Yeah. Like, don't plan. Don't plan. Who needs to plan? Oh yeah, so the SCOTUS is reviewing or has passed or is deliberating on a new law that will allow companies to sue for financial action. Yeah, the Supreme Court is absolutely brilliant, right? The Supreme Court is absolutely doing everything they can to make sure that fascism wins. Oh, come on, I had it right in front of my fingers. I've been reporting on this. Come on. Oh well. I'm sure I have it. But, like, the Supreme Court has been attacking unions and has been going after unions. Yeah, here you go. Like, it's over, guys. Like, anybody who wants to stand in front of me and say that we live in a democracy, it's a total fucking joke. Like, it's a total fucking joke. We live in an oligarchy. The oligarchs rule. They're appointing leadership. And the next, like, the midterm elections will really start to lean in that direction, and then the next presidential election, it'll be obvious. Like, not to say that these Democrats have been, like, the greatest fighters for workers' rights or anything, but, like, it's going to get extremely obvious extremely fast. And we have to make a decision as a people. Are we just going to bow our heads and go along with it, like the liberals and conservatives 100% will? Or are we actually going to do what must be done and actually fight back? We'll see. Like, we'll see. Like, the population of Canada looks really pathetic right now. Like, pathetic is the word that I would use, right? Like, if you're not actively bootlicking, you're basically just crying in a corner. I mean, that's just pure uncut bourgeois dictatorship, yeah. There's literally not enough jobs for the amount of people that exist. How are people expected to work hard when not even enough jobs? Yeah. It's all fucking gaslighting, right, at this point. Yeah, I saw that lawsuit, total dystopia. Workers walked off the job and the government violence is going to make sure they stay and work for the profits of the owners. Yeah, exactly. Right, and eventually, like, I've already seen legislation. I don't have the article right in front of me, but I've already seen situations where, like, people were quitting their jobs, right? That there was, like, a walkout, and the government basically said you can't do that and forced them back to work. Like, so much for the idea that we're not serfs, right? So much for even the idea that we can quit and go work for someone else, right? Like, they will do away with that. Right? They will do away with that. That if you are a serf, which you are, working for, I don't know, the Department of Energy, and you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to quit and go find something else, they'll just say no. That they'll reinstate the legal system that says you need the permission of your owner to quit. Right? Like, in feudalism, you could move and go live under a different lord if you wanted. Right? That was something you could do. You could relocate and go live under a different lord or a knight or a baron or whoever. But you needed the permission of your owner. You needed the permission of your local lord to do so. And they could say no. Right? That's coming back. That's coming back. Andrea, $18 minimum wage in 2026, became Hamilton mayor. Yeah. I guess that's better than having a Tory. I mean, Andrea Horwath, that's where she always should have been. That's where she always should have been. Like, she was never going to be the premier of Ontario. Like, when you look at the fight that she put up in the last... like, everybody knew that this last run was her last run. And I'm of the opinion that she didn't want to be the premier. Like, really. I really am of the opinion that she wasn't interested in being the premier. Because the fight she put up was worthless. It was completely worthless. I think very much how I think of Jagmeet Singh, of her, which is that she was just happy to be the leader of the NDP. And now she's like moved back into Plan B, and Plan B is to be the mayor of Hamilton, right? So, in many ways, her run has paid off, right? That she was, 16 years the leader of the NDP. So, just a controlled descent, not really needing to do a job. Like, really? Like, what's her job? Like, what does she do for a living, right? And she's making like $300,000 a year doing it. And and now that she's out, well, then she just pivots and just becomes the mayor of a major city, right? Just the mayor of a major city, right? Again, like she literally just like sits in a chair and signs documents every so often. Like what a cushy gig, right? And so it's like the reward for her having been controlled dissent in Ontario, and basically handing the election over to a rapacious, overt, obvious psychopath, right? Like Doug Ford is literally starting to reveal to everyone, just everyone, that he's a nightmare psychopath. Like his goal is to destroy the province of Ontario, sell it out to private interests, to himself basically, right? Like he views himself as a mafia boss, straight up, like, and he's not hiding it, I mean he's just an overt coward who isn't actually capable of governing because he's not interested in governing, and now he's literally going to get rid of conservation authorities. Like, literally the laws that say, hey, we should not indiscriminately clear-cut our society and clear-cut our land. He's basically just going to be like, forget about that. He's going to say to developers, you no longer even need to do an environmental check on whether or not you can develop the land. So I don't care if it's like wetland, I don't care if it's protected land, I don't care if there's species on it, I don't care. I don't care how this interacts in the environment or in the society. Build whatever you want beside a river and pollute that river as much as you want. That's essentially what this guy is saying. Because he's a psychopath. And he's only interested in his own wealth and prestige. He literally doesn't care about anything else. And Andrea Horwath refused, and I call it an outright refusal, like refused to actually mount an offense against this guy because she was never there to do that. She's controlled dissent. She's there so that if the populace goes, oh shit, this guy's a nightmare psychopath, we should vote for literally anybody else, which this logic works in like the 1970s and 80s when people are still, and throughout the 90s, when people are still like, well, better vote for the lesser of two evils. But now people have come to understand that there is no such thing as the lesser of two evils. If you are pro-capitalist, you are just evil. That's it. It's just one color now. That there is no such thing as the moderate wing of fascism. There's just fascism. And that's where we're at this point. I agree that's mostly right about electoralism. But Dimitri was close even with all the shenanigans. No, he wasn't. He wasn't close. Like, he was never going to reach that position. Good to see you, by the way, Mocked. Don't mean to ignore you. I would like to continue where we finished off yesterday. Where was that, John? Where was that? What subject would you like to talk about? Very nice pullover. Thank you, Mocked. I appreciate that. I am a fashionable person after all. And one of the things, of course, that's happening all throughout Canada, worth talking about, right, is the whether or not the Emergencies Act was valid. It wasn't, obviously. Like, I think you got to be a real bootlicker, like a real bootlicker. I think it's fine to say, like, well, to take kind of a middle ground position and be like, hey, the investigation's in, let's find out, right? But I genuinely think that if you're sitting there being like, it was absolutely necessary, we absolutely had to have used the Emergencies Act, I think you're just allowing your partisan politics to cloud your judgment. Just straight up. I just think that you're saying that happened to conservative types and so it was fine. I really think that's what you're doing. And you're not stepping back and thinking about how dangerous the evocation of the Emergency Act is to the populace. You're not thinking about how it is a threat to protest movements and to groups that have been protesting across Canada, that essentially what it said to people across Canada was, if you protest effectively, we will evoke the most draconian legislation that exists on the books. We will lock up the leaders of that organization. We will steal all your money, and we will ensure that you can no longer participate. And we'll charge you with things that essentially amount to protesting, right? Like, oh, mischief, and the things they're throwing at Tamara Lich and Pat King. It's essentially saying, we are charging you with the crime of protesting. And these things should be extremely and extraordinarily concerning. And we should be extremely concerned that the government is practicing at rounding people up. We should be extremely concerned by that. And again, all of that is separate from the politics of it. All of that is separate from the, like, I don't ostensibly agree with the politics of what the protest movement was about. But they're Canadian citizens. They have the right to protest. They have the right to be heard. And they have the right to have their grievances aired, right? And to have a legitimate conversation with elected representatives. Like, that's how democracy actually functions. And when people say, if the Liberals went and talked to them, they would legitimize them, and we don't want that. Well, what do you think Evoking the Emergencies Act does? Right? If ever anything legitimizes a movement, it's this, right? Like, what are you talking about? And so, we're just kind of looking at a childishness again in the conversation, where people are not allowed or permitted to have a nuanced perspective. That wasn't a protest; it was an occupation. I mean, semantics, as far as I'm concerned. Semantics. Like, if all you're going to do is just devolve into a semantic argument, then I don't care to move forward. Like, they literally were at the Capitol, where the Parliament building is. Like, I don't know what to tell you here. Like, maybe you don't like the nature of it, right? If I had access to 1,000 trucks, 1,000 semis, I would do the same thing. Absolutely. Like, absolutely I would. Like, what are you talking about? I absolutely would do exactly the same thing. Doug Ford is lame. I want that Rob Ford guy. He seems cool. Well, I mean, Rob actually was cooler than Doug, right? Like, Doug Ford's the mafia boss, right? Rob was just his stupid brother. Like, Rob wasn't the guy planning anything, and obviously didn't plan anything. His tenure as mayor was a total fucking clown show. But near as anybody, like, anytime you interviewed anybody, any of his constituents and any of that kind of stuff, like, everybody loved Rob, right? He had that kind of, like, Chris Farley style charm. And it's hilarious because, like, when the Coke story broke and everybody across Canada and the United States learned about it, we were all like, oh my God. But you go talk to his constituents and their essential attitude of it was like, yeah, that's why we loved him. He would do Coke with us. He'd come out to parties and we'd all, like, take out some drugs, and he would do drugs with us and we'd have a great time, and we loved him. Right? Like, the people who were voting for Rob Ford when the story broke and everyone was like, I can't believe he was doing cocaine, and they're all like, yeah, we know. Like, that's what happened. And so the people who are voting for Rob and Doug Ford, like, they know. Like, anytime these stories break, and the rest of Canada is aghast by it, right? The response from Ford Nation is, yeah, we know, right? And it's the same with like, oh, Doug Ford is impoverishing people and throwing them out onto the streets and homelessness and all this. And their answer is going to be, yeah, we know. Like, they have the support of the people who are voting for them. And the people who are voting for them are just as reprehensible as they are. Just straight up. Like, I know that has a like deplorables kind of attitude about it. But like, go talk to these people. Right? Like, I have been involved in protests at Doug Ford's house, and I have interacted with these people. Right? They're reprehensible. They're terrible people. Like, terrible people. The worst people in the society. Not even close. Like, not even close. Like, I would put more trust in, like, a petty thief or, like, somebody who is literally an assassin. I would put more trust in that person than I would any of these Doug Ford voters. Like, for real. It's insane, the level of bigotry, the disconnected bubble thinking, the disregard they have for their fellow citizens, the amount of hatred that they have for people who are poor, disabled, and homeless. It's palatable. And they'll tell you, shamelessly tell you. Like, there isn't even a sense that, like, maybe I'm wrong or maybe it's incorrect. They're proud to tell you how much they despise the poor and disabled. They're proud to tell you how much they hate those people. And they'll outright tell you about it. Just start a conversation with these guys. And they'll open with, oh, those people just need jobs. Oh, those dingy people, right? They'll open with that, right? Good evening, Demand Better. How you doing, bud? Demand Better World. Absolutely, bud. Just going to put this out there. What about them rounding up anti-COVID protesters in Toronto because it was a public health violation? What, did that happen? Like, the anti-COVID protest movement was the largest, and in many ways is still the largest protest movement in Toronto. They've never been rounded up. Like, that's never happened. Like, literally thousands of people constantly in a situation of close contact. When did they? Can I get an article on this? Like, I've never heard anything about anti-COVID protesters being rounded up. Like, that's news to me. Hey David, how you doing, bud? The most fucked up thing about paying taxes is almost none of it goes to infrastructure, education, healthcare, things that would improve the quality of life. Instead, it goes to police and military and war. I will try to find you it, but the police moved in on them in Dundas Square during the thick of it. I mean, I'm sure that there was a couple of clashes. Like, I'm sure that happened. But, like, every Saturday they were doing that protest. And sometimes it was only 100 people, but sometimes it was a couple thousand, right? Like, it was a regularly scheduled protest that the police knew about, they were very aware of. And again, like, I'm absolutely positive that, like, if a couple of Saturdays or, like, once in a while, the police and those protesters would clash. I'm sure it happened. But, like, overall, across the board, that protest happens every Saturday. Right? And they march through Dundas Square and around the block. That's what they do. And it's an anti-COVID movement, the leaders of which are delusional losers who are saying things like COVID doesn't exist, whose arguments are detached from reality. And again, though, like, these people have the right to protest, and it goes unharassed now. It didn't before. Yeah, I mean, I suspect that's the case. Like, to me, one of the things that I think is important to remember when it comes to anti-COVID protests is, like, one of the situations, one of the positions that they take that I kind of get sympathetic towards is, like, there is such a thing as government overreach, right? Like once you get out of the fear and once you get out of the hysteria of it, and you actually kind of think about it for a moment, like, yeah, there is such a thing as government overreach, and the government absolutely, and the oligarchy, like, I shouldn't say the government, because that's not what it is, it's the oligarchy. The oligarchy absolutely will use situations like this in order to implement policies that are fascist, right? They absolutely will do that. And one of the things that comes out of the anti-COVID protest movement that I ostensibly agree with, that never gets mentioned, is that these guys are against the idea of government, what they would call government overreach, but what I would call fascist implementation of policy by the oligarchy, right? That and I've seen, like, there are policies that I would look at and be like, yep, no, that's not going to happen, right? Like, there was a moment in my neighborhood where they were attempting to implement, if you wanted to enter an establishment, you would have to scan a QR code on your phone. And there were businesses all up and down my streets that had these, the government forced them to put these QR codes on their business. And if you didn't scan it with your vaccine registration on it, you you were not permitted to enter the business. It fell apart instantaneously. Because I remember I walked up to it and I looked at it, and then I went to their website, and it was difficult to interact with, and I just immediately was like, fuck this, and I just walked inside. And it's not like there's a cop standing there, right? And the guy inside of it is completely disincentivized. Like, he doesn't give a fuck about this. He's been forced to put this on there. And so the powers that be immediately realized, like, oh, okay, well, if we actually want this to be enforced, then we're going to have to put in enforcers, because business owners and workers, serfs aren't gonna enforce this. Like, they don't give a fuck. And what, are they gonna have a fight with literally every customer that tries to come in? No. So everyone just ignored it, right? Which put the power structure in the position of, okay, well, how do we enforce this? Are we literally gonna put cops on every street? And the answer was no, and so the idea died, right? But it could have gone the other way, right? And so there are clear, obvious, and I consider that to be massive overreach. Even the idea that they thought that they had the right to do this. That we're going to put a QR code on the front of every building that you have to scan. It's bad enough that we have these tracking devices on us all the time. But now we also have to track literally what places we go into. We literally have to be tracking ourselves and tracking everything and giving that information to the oligarchy. No. And a part of the anti-COVID protest movement is this narrative that what they would call the government, but that I call the oligarchy, needs to be told to go fuck off, right? And I sensibly agree with that. And again, I don't really mind that these people are protesting. It doesn't bother me. It really seems to bother liberals a lot. It really seems to bother liberals a lot, because liberals have this idea in their mind that these guys are protesting and that's going to spread it around even more. But the vaccines that they gave everybody didn't prevent the spread, right? That the vaccine, the theory behind the vaccine was that you will simply be protected from the worst aspects of it. That when you get it, you're not going to you're not going to get so sick and you're not going to die. Right? And that's true. That's the truth. And so, but it doesn't prevent the spread. If you have it, you can still spread it to somebody else. And so when the goalposts moved, because that narrative shifted and changed, that it's moved now to, okay, yeah, but now you're a burden on the healthcare system, right? So now that when you go to, when you get it, you get sick and you have to go to the hospital, and that's a burden on the healthcare system. Which is true to a certain degree, but then my question is, well, then why is the oligarchy cutting funding to the hospitals, right? If there's all these people and they're a big burden on the hospital system, then why are we cutting funding to the hospitals right in the middle of a pandemic, right? I've never had an answer to that, of course. You don't get an answer to that. hey, the Bank of Canada decides to make us poor to fight inflation. What a time to be alive. Yeah, they're purposefully imploding the economy, right? I think the capitalists have come to understand that the economy is going to collapse anyway. And so now they're just trying to make it collapse in slow motion, right? Like they know the building is here. They know it's falling over, right? And so their goal is to make it so that it doesn't just go. Their goal is to make it go in the hopes that the serfs will accept it. That's literally what we're watching. I guess COVID wasn't deadly enough, John. Aside from the liberal moral positions, what in your mind would have to happen where government disciplining the masses is acceptable? Don't get me wrong here, okay? I think that it's always a negotiation. That's my general position. Like, I believe in the concept of democracy, right? Which is that everybody is going to talk to one another and we're going to create consensuses. That's why the oligarchy is such a disaster for democracy. Because the oligarchy can just overwhelm the masses with billboards and enormous voices and erecting institutions that are all essentially a-democratic, right? They're not non-democratic, but they're the antithesis of democracy, right? So instead of everybody getting together, airing their concerns and talking to one another to try to find a consensus, right? We have these extremely bad faith actors who are interested in selling products, manipulating narratives, and deluding people to enter the conversation. And because they're bad faith actors, there is no consensus that can be reached, right? And so under this configuration, like, there is no circumstance where the government disciplining the masses is acceptable because it's an oligarchy, right? It's no different than saying to me, when would you accept Darth Vader's edicts? I won't. I simply won't, right? That if we were actually a democracy that was actually interested in finding consensus and compromise and attempting to move forward in rational ways, attempting to move forward in a rational society, then when the Freedom Convoy began, the very first thing we would have done is talk to them. Very first thing we would have done. We would have been like, oh shit, like these guys are putting forward a lot of energy. They must really care about this. Let's talk to them and see what's going on. Right? What's going on? Instead of that, the leader of our country called them Nazis, painted them as a far-right fringe movement, which, I mean, yeah, they are a far-right movement for sure, right? Like, that's undeniable. But they're not Nazis, right? Like, people like Peterson are ostensibly... I mean, honestly, Justin Trudeau is more of a Nazi than these guys, right? Like, Justin Trudeau literally funds Nazis. Like, he literally gives money to Nazi organizations in order to fight his wars for him. So, like... It's like a real pot calling the kettle black sort of situation. Ostensibly, like, I take a look, and I just take a look at the guys, the guys that did, like, why would anyone actually do that unless they felt like they had to, right? Like, what was happening to these guys was that the way the COVID legislation, the way the mandates were occurring to them, it was threatening their livelihood. He was threatening their livelihood. And these guys live a life that is ostensibly like, you know, don't tread on me, go fuck yourself, right? Like, leave me alone. And the idea that the government's going after these guys, like, they were asking for a fight. They were asking for a fight, they got it, right? They got the fight they asked for. And instead of doing what any rational democracy would do and be like, oh, we should talk to these guys, because I do believe in the idea that, like, an elected government can pass legislation and have there be unintended consequences or errors or mistakes, right? I believe in that, right? And the whole idea of talking to one another is to redress those things. But we don't live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy. There is no such thing as accepting what our governments actually say, right? Like, there is no, like, you're essentially saying just listen. We should always just listen to what the oligarchs have to say. Nah, like these people are psychopaths. They're interested in selling products, right? That's their only interest. Their only interest is to sell products. That's why the climate change catastrophe is not going to be resolved, because you can't sell products out of it. Like the selling products is the problem, right? That the more you sell products, the more you create emissions, and the more you create environmental devastation and destruction. That's the problem. And so you can't sell products to solve the issue. And so it's just going to lead to more destruction. Now, or is people just dying for the sake of not offending a liberal moral position just entirely acceptable? I mean, a big issue that we're looking at is that there is a, like, the breakdown is a breakdown of communication, right? Like, it is a breakdown of communication. Nobody trusts anybody anymore because the system isn't designed for that. There's no such thing as unity. There's no such thing as collective action anymore. And in fact, the oligarchy has funded people in order to literally say that collective action is bad, and that any concept of getting together and making collective decisions shouldn't happen, right? And so the idea that amidst the chaos that is generated from creating this society, we're going to demonize people for like leaping one way instead of the other. I mean, I just find it to be a bit narrow. Like, I find it to be a bit narrow. Like, yes, of course, scared, uninformed, mistrustful people who are living in a world that has structured itself to reward psychopaths are on occasion going to make decisions that aren't necessarily even for their own benefit, right? And if turning to those people and snickering at them and saying, haha, what a bunch of idiots, and then demonizing them, calling them Nazis, and saying that it's okay to throw cops at them and evoke an emergency act, I think you're just playing into the hands of the oligarchy, right? Like, if you configure your society to be this way, things like the Freedom Convoy, things like the protest movement in Toronto are an inevitability. It is inevitable that these things occur. And to blame those people instead of focusing on the structure that's generating these movements in the first place, I think is a mistake. I think it is a mistake. And like, so I take a look at the people dying over COVID as not a fault of the individuals, right? Which is essentially the argument, right? It's the fault of those individuals, but as a fault of the structure of the society that has betrayed all of us, right? Like, I don't know why when it comes to the Freedom Convoy people, we're supposed to be like, oh yeah, they are somehow immune to structural forces. Like, and we kind of get caught up in how dumb they are. And like, let me be extremely clear about this, guys. Like, the Freedom Convoy people, like, let me say it in the nicest possible way. The nicest way I can possibly say it. They do not have a structural analysis. They don't actually know what's going on. They don't actually have they don't understand the relationship between the ownership class and the government. They strictly they do not know this. That their observation about how the world works is very small. That it doesn't actually go much further than their truck, right? Like, the cab of their truck is their worldview, and that is what they see in the world. So they have this reduced view that makes it very easy to convince them that the individual is sacrosanct, and there is no such thing as a collective action, or there's no such thing, or that government is the problem. It becomes very easy to convince people with a reduced and very tiny worldview that the world operates in that very reduced view, and that there is no meta perspective and there is no structural analysis that could be done. Right? That's why libertarians and like organizations like the PPC are incoherent. Like they're incoherent, and I feel like the system is arrayed to prey on those people, right? Because they're not interested in informing them, right? They're not interested in giving them any information. They're not interested in giving them any perspective. They're interested in manipulating them to get votes from them to attain power for themselves. That's what they're interested in, and that's the structure of the system. That's how it's arrayed. Like the Freedom Convoy are also victims. I think this is the like where I'm constantly driving towards with these guys. They too are victims, right? They too have been victimized by the system, right? They and like I don't know why I'm supposed to have sympathy for prisoners, for people who are literally arrested by and put in prison by the state, but I'm supposed to absolve myself of having that kind of perspective when it comes to these guys. Like, they are also victims of the oligarchy and of the structure, and they are also being duped, and they are also being manipulated. They are also treated as pawns. And I feel like their grievances and the emotions that they have are legitimate. I think that they are that what they are doing and how they are acting and what they are pursuing is legitimate. Like, I'm sorry, it is. Right? Like, is it the perfect solution to well, maybe they should be in all the, like, okay, but they don't have a meta-analysis. Like, when you try to do a meta-analysis of them and say, well, they should have done this, well, they don't have that. Like, they're not self-aware. They're not looking at the world around them and saying, like, well, what is the meta-analysis? Like, what is the structure? Like, they're not doing that. And I feel like to try to funnel the conversation into that way is very disingenuous. Like, and I don't mean to be insulting with that. I just think that it's like they're not there. Like, they're reacting. They're reacting to the situation. And it's kind of inevitable that this would occur. And you can call them selfish. You can say what you like about them, right? That's fine. It doesn't preclude that these people are citizens, that they have the right to protest, that they're in a situation that is frustrating for them. I can respect why they are frustrated, right? I can respect why they are frustrated. And that my concern, like, I don't understand why I'm supposed to be more appalled by them than by the fucking government. Like, that's another part of this that I get a little like, wait a minute. Why am I never will ever in the history of my life take the side of the government, right? Ever. I literally will never be like, yeah, the government's right. No, it's an oligarchy. Like, these people are owned by oligarchs with the objective of extracting wealth from the populace and then abandoning us. And so I don't understand, like, is the complaint that the Freedom Convoy's protests and struggle aren't perfectly articulated? Like, is that the complaint? Like, is of course it's messy, and of course it's ridiculous, and of course it's incoherent. Their worldview is incoherent. Like, of course it is, right? Like, it's just humans just reacting in a way while the government literally fucking evokes the most draconian legislation we see in the country in order to arrest and prosecute them. Like, I don't know why why am I more concerned about these guys than this? Like, holy fuck. Like, that's the punchline to me. Like, that's the punchline to me. Like, what laws did these guys break? Like, what laws did these guys actually break? Like, what thing did they do that we can point at and genuinely say, and, like, I don't care if you think they're scumbags. I don't give a shit at all. Like, I genuinely don't give a shit about your, like, well, the public health, like, I don't care about that even a little. Like, to me, that's just like, yeah, like, why did a bunch of people during a public pandemic feel the need to do this? Right? There's a question. And the truth is that we're just not talking to these guys. And when we do talk to these guys, we're not accepting that uh, uh, we're coming at them very condescendingly. We're coming at them very condescendingly, and yeah, like if they had all the information and did a structural analysis, right, got educated in that regard, they probably would ostensibly agree with us. But that's not what's happening, right? That's not what's happening. The forces of the structure have arrayed themselves against them as well. And I don't know why I'm supposed to take the government's side. Restriction. A restriction on protest is a restriction on protest. Yeah, I mean, that's... I mean, I can see how at the very beginning... And let's be really clear, right? Like, because oftentimes the human element of this gets distilled out of the conversation. We're supposed to expect people to act in perfect ways. And they won't. They just won't, right? I think it's completely reasonable that in the mass hysteria that was the COVID pandemic at the beginning of it, that as a protest movement began, the police responded inappropriately or in a way that was with hysteria. But then the protest movement persisted. And I just think to me, the height of the hysteria of all of that here in Ontario anyway was when Doug Ford essentially gave the police fascist powers to be able to essentially arrest who they liked whenever they wanted, that were so draconian and so overwhelming that the police said no thank you. Like, that was the height of it, in my view. Like, the peak of it. That, like, Doug Ford tried to give fascist authority to the police, and the police said no thanks. To me, that was, like, the moment when sense started to enter the conversation. And it's crazy that the police were the ones that had to say no thanks to draconian fascist powers. Like, that's crazy. But such is the nature of the society that we live in. They want to give the rich another $1 trillion while more people fall into poverty. Yeah, exactly, right? Because it's a religious system, right? Money is God. People who have money are good. All they need is just more money, and then they can solve the problems of the world better. The issue isn't that poor people don't have access to resources. The issue is that rich people don't have enough resources to give to them, which they don't. Yeah, that's literally the idea of Milton Friedman's monetary policies that the West applies since the 80s, yeah. Like, honest talk, do you really think you'll be free during the revolution or during the young new dictatorship of the workers? I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. So I mean, I can't... Who knows what system is going to be erected, and who knows... To me, the most... excuse me. To me, the most likely thing to happen is that we will simply be forced to rely on one another locally. That the people who live on your street or on your block will become way more important than your premier or even your mayor. Like, I genuinely think that what we are experiencing and what we will continue to experience is an extraction and abandonment that people living in like wards or districts will literally have to look at one another and be like, okay, like we're this is it. Like, we're in it for ourselves. There is no system that is coming to relieve any of this. There is no system that is going to respond to this. There is no structure. There's no bureaucrat. There's no institution that is interested in responding rationally to this. So, and you're going to see an array of different political systems and an array of different political ideas come out of this retraction, because that's essentially what it is. And the federal and provincial governments will essentially become like an empire-ish overmind, that the citizens of these places will essentially act the way they want, and then every so often they'll have to interact with this illegitimate force that comes in with cops to beat everybody up. And then when those people leave, the citizens will return to what they think is normal and what they think will work. And as we move forward, it'll get more aggressive. Like, especially as more kids are born into the system, like, kids will eventually start just occupying empty places, right? Because they'll literally have nothing to lose and nothing to gain. So they'll take a look at all of the boarded up empty buildings and all of the boarded up empty businesses, and they'll literally just start saying, this is stupid. And they'll just go in and start doing stuff with them. And then owners will find out that that's the case. Like, the people who live in, like, Florida but own property in Toronto will figure out that that's the case, and then they'll contact somebody, and then the cops will come in and beat people up and do all that kind of stuff. And then the cops will leave because they don't want to continuously spend the resources in order to do this. And then the kids will come back in and just continue it. That's what I expect to see. Like, because our governmental systems are no longer capable of responding to the people. They're no longer interested in responding to the people. They're no longer interested in responding to crises. And the rational response to this abandonment on this scale is that the citizens are just going to take matters into their own hands and erect unofficial institutions for themselves and just talk to each other. And, like, literally, like, I'm quite serious, like, church groups will become more prominent and have more authority in the minds of local people, right? Like, and you can see the reality of this sinking into the populace as they just no longer interact. Like, they don't go and vote, right? They don't vote. So they don't think that this has any legitimacy. And they don't think it matters who gets into these positions because the overwhelming policy is extraction and abandonment. And so the wisest thing for everybody to do is just start talking to your neighbors and start erecting systems, and stop asking permission from this illegitimate bureaucracy that is dead. Like, it's never going to turn around and respond. Its influence on our day-to-day life will begin to wither away, and what will matter is the people around you and the systems that they introduce and they erect, and it's just going to be different place by place by place by place. And the concept of, like, freedom, like freedom, like freedom to do what, freedom for what is freedom, what is that, what does it mean? That's something that I think, like, the libertarians have really introduced this idea of, like, freedom. Well, okay, freedom to do what? Freedom for what? What is freedom even? Is freedom literally just you owning slaves? Like, is that freedom? Right? Because I have some things to say to that. Like, what is freedom? What is that? Yeah, democracy doesn't work in a fire capitalist structure, yeah. The only reason I would say the Canadian government was wrong is because the wrong people were calling the shots. Any worker dictatorship tolerating a plague because some brats felt oppressed. I mean, to me, like, to me, the most offensive part about it is that there was no discussion. That's what makes it offensive to me. That, like, there wasn't even an attempt. And there still, incidentally, has never been an attempt. That the discussion is ostensibly happening through the political parties at this point. That the Freedom Convoy movement has essentially been adopted by the Conservative Party. And it's Pierre Poilievre now that's as the leader of the opposition talking to the federal government about that. That's very offensive to me. Like, you think about, like, a dictatorship of the proletariat or a working class, and an organization like the Freedom Convoy erecting and coming out and in protest. Well, the appropriate thing to do is to look at them and be like, oh shit, okay, well, what's going on? Let's air these grievances. Let's talk about what your grievances are and attempt to find a compromise and attempt to smooth this out. And the idea that wouldn't happen, I think, is disconnected. Like, it's going to happen. Humans are humans, right? we're never going to get away from the fact and reality that as we are moving forward as people, other smaller groups are going to stand up and be like, hey, what about? Hey, we've been left out in the cold, right? And instead, and essentially what the government has done is taken these people and shunted them away, demonized them, called them Nazis, said that what they're doing is illegitimate, instead of looking at them and going, oh, okay, what? I mean, John's opinion is basically mine. There were lots of idiots in the anti-COVID protest movement, but there is something wrong with the government opposing it. And I mean, this is why I say that we should be moving forward with a spirit of forgiveness. That we should be saying to one another, like, it was a hysteria. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong calling it that. And moreover, I don't think there's anything wrong with the fact that was the truth. Like, I'm not looking at the populace, and I'm not looking at people and being like, oh, what a bunch of idiots. I, too, was caught up in this hysteria. And if you go back and you take a look at the way I was talking during that period of time, I was not willing to take a strong position on any of it. I still am not willing to take a strong position on any of it, because it's an extremely complex issue with a lot of different things going on that cuts deeply to the heart of what it is to be a human being and what it is to be alive. And the only position I really was willing to take was we should listen to what the doctors and nurses are saying. That was it. That if the doctors and nurses are saying do this, then we should do that, right? But I do find it a little bit offensive that we're not allowed to have dissenting views. I also find it a little bit offensive that I'm supposed to sacrifice my humanity or other people's humanity for a perception of what might occur. Like, people should be able to complain. And to me, like, why even allow the Freedom Convoy to get off the ground? You know? Like, you can see it coming. Like, you can see, like, all these guys are getting into trucks and they're gonna come and all that kind of stuff. And, like, why even let it off the ground? Like, I don't know why I'm supposed to put more blame on these independent truckers who are just trying to fight for their livelihood than literally the fucking government that has a military and has been co-opted by an oligarchy. Don't worry, John. Nuclear holocaust will get us first before climate. That's right, Tinker. Always look on the bright side, right? Forget about this slow bleed out to oblivion. Let's do it all in one, like, let's go. Let's go, Brandon. Nature transcends our expectations of rights and law, I'd argue. The next pandemic might be perfect. Like flesh-eating airborne staph that melts your family in front of you. Yeah, no shit, eh, Cotton? Like, well, okay, let's real talk here about this. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna go pee, and then we're gonna do some, like, real fucking shit right here about that specific point. Because, like, the Daily Mail reported that we've already created a COVID strain that has an 80% kill rate, right? So like, here's a funny argument that I've made in the past, and I think it applies to this sort of thing, right? There's this concept, like sex robots. If we make sex robots, people will just have sex with the sex robots, right? And so there's this kind of question of like, well, should we allow the sex robots and all this kind of stuff? And my position is basically, yeah, let people have sex robots, okay? Because this is a problem that solves itself. Because the people who are going to go have sex with sex robots are not going to have children. And so whatever is making them go have sex with sex robots is going to That strain of evolution is going to eliminate itself. That's an evolutionary dead end, and they're going to do it to themselves. And so I'm just like, yeah, okay. Like, that's my opinion. And I think very much the same on it on this way. That if there's a pandemic, a plague that happens that has this kind of scale that you're talking about, well, the people that are going to walk around with their cock out basically saying, like, oh, I don't give a shit, no, fuck you. Well, they're going to die. Right? They're going to die. And the people who are willing to respond rationally, and the people who are willing to hunker down, and the people who are willing to just like, okay, right, and put on the precautions and all that kind of stuff, won't. And will it be messy? Like, it's not going to be that simple, obviously, but will it be messy? Yeah. Obviously. Like, obviously, it's humans. And the concern that we should have isn't these individuals are individualizing their individualism, but we should be saying, why are we living in a structure that nobody trusts? Like, that's the more important question. And as long as we continue playing their game, which is that it's all individuals individualizing their individualism, which is essentially what we're doing with the Freedom Convoy, then we can never actually ask the deeper questions, which is, well, why do people not trust the structure? Why do people not trust these institutions? Why is that the case? And the consequences of it may be exactly as you say, that a new pandemic will sweep through. We've already created one. Like, we've already created a virus that could kill 80% of the people infected by it. We've created it. So we know it's possible, right? And should that sweep through? Well, the places that have trust in their institutions and that have faith in the idea that their institutions are actually looking out for them will fare fairly well. And the ones that don't will have a mass cull. And that's true. Right? And that's not because individuals are individualizing their individualism. It's because people don't trust these institutions and these structures. And so you have a real, like, boy who cried wolf kind of situation going on a societal level. Right? That the reason why you should not allow institutions to lie to you, and the reason why you shouldn't allow organizations to spread disinformation and lies, is that in a moment in which it's crucial that the truth be listened to, people won't, because they expect these institutions to lie. And, like, the right to lie to the populace is enshrined by the Supreme Court in the United States. So, will it be brutal? Yeah, obviously. Like, obviously. But it's completely predictable, and we know why it's happening. And it's yet another reason why countries in the West are going to collapse, and why countries that are not in the West are going to fare better. Because people in places like China actually trust their institutions to a degree. Right? Like, is it to the same degree? Like, is it perfect? No, obviously. But in comparison, like, through the COVID the people of China were more or less responsive and more or less going along with it, because they actually saw their government trying to do shit and trying to give a fuck. Right? Like, our governments don't give a fuck. Like, we literally watched our governments do everything they could to end the pandemic and put us all back to work. That's literally what we saw. We saw them erect a basic income and then dismantle it in front of our eyes. Like, and there's just gonna be a moment where, and I think it will happen, Conton. Like, if I'm honest, like, I think it will happen. Like, that COVID in the end of the day wasn't, like, the worst thing that's ever happened. Like, it's bad in the modern period. But, like, have we done anything to prevent others? No. If anything, we're just continuing on, right? And maybe we're like, oh, we should erect more masks and we should do this. Like, we should actually erect local manufacturing and all this kind of stuff so we have access to this. And we're not relying on China or Vietnam or whoever to make these things for us. Like, that's an idea that's actually taking hold to a certain degree. But, like, are we actually changing any of our practices? Are we actually changing any of the things that we do in order to prevent another plague in the future? No. And if anything, quite the opposite. So I actually think that it's likely that we experience another pandemic, and it's likely that the next pandemic will actually be worse. I think that's likely. And it's going to be very bad for Westerners because we have huge segments of the population that don't trust our institutions, and they don't trust the institutions because the institutions are untrustworthy. Very straightforwardly, they're just untrustworthy. And like, so we've planted these seeds, and we're gonna see the crops that they bear. Hey, Christopher Da Silva, how you doing, bud? Yeah, I read today something about the Supreme Court going after collective bargaining. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Like, it's over, guys. Like, it's over. And I just don't think we should be pretending. I just don't think we should be pretending. Like, the American system of democracy is over. The Westminster political system, it's over. And you're never going to see a political movement or enter the halls of power in order to address it. It's just not going to happen. And like the Supreme Court, like, you think it's bad now? Wait until the Republicans are in power, which is going to happen soon, right? Like, just wait. Like, you think that what the Supreme Court is doing is outrageous now? Just wait, man. Like, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that we're collapsing back into feudalism. Like, this shouldn't shock us. I think that's kind of where I'm going to land on it. Like, this shouldn't shock us. We shouldn't be sitting here being like, can you believe? Yeah, of course I can. Can I believe that a king doesn't want peasants to revolt? Yeah. Can I believe that a king feels he should have the right to send his knights in and start beating the shit out of peasants who are in a peasants' revolt? Yeah. Like, we should be studying European history, right? Studying the monarchical period. Like, forget about the whole, the American Revolution and that whole period, oh my God, and all that kind of stuff. Forget about that. That's a flash in the pan. We should be taking a look at the history of the Roman Empire, right? Its subsequent fading out, because it didn't collapse, it just faded away, it just retracted, because it was no longer able to, it lost its credibility, it was no longer able to sustain itself. The subsequent feudal period, right? The rules and the legislation and the negotiations that happened throughout that period. And we should say that's what we expect to become. Because that's what we will become. This whole capitalist moment only really exists because there is no monarchical power throughout the lands that we're conquering. Right? That like what we witnessed was essentially a sweeping through of military and corporate power on behalf of a monarchy, which then the militarists and the corporatists that swept through, committing multiple genocides and enslaving multiple populations while doing it, on behalf of a monarchy, erecting a system that essentially responds to the monarchy. And throughout America, it's erecting a system in order to maintain wealth within, maintain power within the wealth of the nation. It explicitly says so in the document. And so now that the sweeping through and the resource pillaging is over, we've entered an era of neo-colonialism where now we've colonized this, declared independence from the old monarchical powers, and now we're colonizing other places, right? So we've gone back the other way. And the idea that like, oh, well, power can shift, right, through this free market idea is obviously fraudulent and is collapsing. And so we're returning to the system we always had. Feudalism. right? Like, capitalism is going to die. The concept of capitalism is going to die because capitalism itself is full of inherent contradictions that lead to its death. And we're not going to move to socialism. Like, unless there is like a workers' organization, a workers' revolution of some kind, which is possible. But outside of that, it's feudalism. That capitalism will collapse to feudalism. And so when I see the Supreme Court throwing out worker legislation, all this, I'm like, yeah. If you study the history of European feudalism, like, European feudal lords would never allow collective bargaining. What the fuck? Absolutely not. These people don't have rights. They're serfs. They do what I say. And that's basically where we're going. Or, I shouldn't say where we're going. Like, we're there. And I tie it all back in to, like, I'm watching people in my own life who are struggling with this idea that they don't have rights. That they are owned by owners who are coming in and telling them what to do. And they don't care about the opinion of the serfs. They don't care. And these people are really struggling with this. Because to them, this is a new phenomenon. And I'm trying to tell everybody, like, this is the normal now. Like, we are serfs. And it's going to get... And there will be moments where it will just become explicit. Like, it will just become explicit. And I think it pays to remember that over the monarchical period, people didn't really understand where the power lied. People didn't really understand who had power within that system. Like, there are people who are arguing, they're like, well, the Lord is legitimate. He organizes the society, and he's an administrator, and he takes a look at a military power that needs to happen. And of course we need knights. Like, who's going to defend us and all this kind of stuff, right? It's the same kind of pro-cop shit that you hear now, right? Hey man, will you do walks around the graveyard again? It's great when I can't make it to the lives. Oh, thank you, David. I was planning on doing one today, but then it rained. Doing the walk around the graveyard video, like you would think, I'm just working so goddamn much these days, and I should do it for my own mental health is what I should do. And I'm gonna try to do one tomorrow. And I really am gonna try to rededicate myself to those. Because I actually think that those videos are what drives growth in this channel. That when I do one of those videos and I do a walk around, and then I spread that around, over time, that's what's actually driving growth on this channel. Because I know that they don't recommend my videos anymore. I know I've been deprioritized in the algorithm. Soon I'll be removed. Soon I'll be deplatformed completely. Because that's how it's going to go. And So the only way that this channel will grow is if I or you actually spread this stuff around ourselves. That it is word of mouth now. There is no system that's going to do it otherwise. And the graveyard video is useful for that. I also think to myself, like, I've got to start dedicating more energy to YouTube Shorts. The YouTube Shorts system has started to show up. And also, like, I have a TikTok channel. I almost have 10,000 followers on TikTok. Like, TikTok is very, it's easy to, I mean, TikTok's different. Like, it's a different thing, right? So it's not like this. TikTok is more like advertising. Like, it really is more like an like, every single video that exists on TikTok and on YouTube Shorts are essentially structured to be an advertisement. Right? And people don't use them that way. Like, sometimes they're just like, here's a funny dance video, here's a funny, but everybody is, like, the nature of the social media system is that everybody is their own brand. Everybody is selling themselves to a certain degree. And the reason why I struggle to interact with the social media system in that way is because I don't view myself as a commodity. I don't view myself as selling something. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not trying to sell you a product. Any money I make from this is literally happening through donations exclusively. I'm not trying to make merch I find that to be disgusting. I hate that entire concept. And I hate the idea that I'm going to be selling myself. That's why I think that really is why I'm struggling to make a living doing this, is because I really resist my own self-commodification. Even though I'm so grateful when people actually do donate, and I'm so grateful when people actually do participate in that way, it hurts me. So it's bittersweet. I'm grateful, and also it makes me sad. And so when I do, like I have seen people who started the way that I'm starting in the field that I'm doing, and they're doing a lot better because they just know that they're a commodity, and so they commodify themselves, right? And they present themselves as a commodity, and they produce commodities, and they commodify themselves, and so they sell stuff, and people buy it. And there's just a part of me that knows that if I start doing that, I'm just going to kill myself. I think that's what it comes down to. That, like, as long as I'm talking about ideas and spreading thoughts and doing that kind of thing and investing in that way, I find it to be tolerable, and that I can interact with it and get what I like, get what I want from it. But if I were to pervert it through the commodification of myself, I genuinely think that I would just kill myself. So I'm just, so there are consequences to that. Right? There are consequences to that. And maybe that makes me a purist. Like, maybe I should actually bite the bullet. Like, maybe I should actually get over it and just be like, okay, John, you're a commodity, right? People are tuning in because you're a fucking commodity. They want, like, sure, you're providing a world view, and you're providing alternative narratives, and you're providing you're challenging official narratives and all that kind of stuff. But, like, if you want to actually make money at it, you actually want that to be what you do for a living instead of work at a cafe, right? You got to bite the bullet and just be a commodity. And what that means is spreading myself around on other platforms, creating alternative content, like creating, just accepting where the wind blows, right? And, like, trying to stay aware of what the next big thing is, right? Because it's not going to be TikTok for much longer, right? Like, it's going to be something else. And I find that to be a byproduct of the failure of capitalism as well, by the way, that it's very dislocating. And I think that's done on purpose, we're constantly shifting. It's like Facebook to YouTube to TikTok, like, and there's going to be something, Instagram is in there, and there's going to be some kind of new thing. And so you're constantly shifting and changing and needing to be, you're constantly unbalanced. You can't just stay somewhere and do something, right? Like, and it happens so quickly, it happens so fast, that it's almost impossible to remain relevant for any amount of time. And the people who have built large groups, I think, are the people who managed to get in on the ground floor of a new thing while it was happening. And when I'm talking about people like Destiny and Vosh, people like worthless liberals who don't really have that much interesting to say, but just built a base because there was nothing else going on. And so, yeah. That's a long way to say I'm going to do the graveyard videos again. They seem popular. I like them. I just need to start, like, I was working less. Like, I was working at Capitalism less not that long ago, right? So I was able to put more time into those and able to spend more time researching generally, right? And that really helped with the graveyard video, being able to spend a lot of time researching, a lot of time reading. I was reading a lot more. And, but now I'm like, you know, I'm spending Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday now in capitalism. And so I don't really have time to read as much, to research as much, to think, to formulate, to meditate, all of those things. And it's impacted the quality of those graveyard walks. And I think I just need to bite the bullet and just accept that I'm just going to make them, and I don't think I'm going to be happy with the content that I produce. But something I learned a long time ago is that I was producing these graveyard videos and I was unhappy with them, and then people would say that was the best one you've ever done. And so I just got to accept, like, I have to stop being self-critical in that regard and just do them. Because I think the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to do a revisit on Ukraine, because I want to make a video that creates in one place just a video I can show people to be like, this is the story, like this is the narrative that's actually happening in Ukraine. And it's tough to find that kind of thing. Like, you gotta kind of put together pieces. Anyway, thank you for your support, David. I appreciate it. That was a long diatribe of thought vomit. That was very all about me. So thanks for that. Christopher says, I think a lot of those Freedom Convoy protesters are vulnerable enough that whoever gets to them first gets their attention, be it us commies or fascists. Yeah, I think there's truth to what you say there, Christopher. I mean, I think that really speaks to their lack of structural analysis. They don't really have a structural analysis, and so narratives, you can have a lot of different narratives and have them be successful, because if you don't have any narrative, then any other narrative makes sense. The capitalist definition of freedom means slavery if you're poor. Yeah. You have the freedom to pick your master, basically. Do you think the Emergencies Act thing could sink Trudeau? That's a great question, Ben. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily the Emergencies Act per se, but it is just fundamentally true that Justin Trudeau is losing support. That the most telling polling I've seen to date is that his likability as a leader is in decline, and that's like the first time that's happened. That basically he's essentially, like, when people are asked the question, do you like Justin Trudeau, 40% of people say yes, 40% of people say no, and 20% of people say they don't care. And now it's more like 45% of people say no, 35% of people say yes, and the rest say they don't care. And so it's changing. It's changing. It's shifting. It's in decline. And I don't necessarily think that that's tied to the Emergencies Act. I think that conservatives care about it, liberals don't, and everybody else doesn't care. I think I could be convinced otherwise. If there was significant polling data that countered what I just said there, I would accept it. But my perception of it is that it's really only conservatives that give a shit. But that might be enough. Conservatives are losing elections by 2%. Like, it's close. And it's been close this whole time. It was close under Scheer. It was close under O'Toole, right? Like, it's been close. Like, Andrew Scheer was responsible for knocking the Liberals down to minority status. And I actually think that the Conservatives would have been wiser to keep Scheer at the helm and just say the narrative. Yeah, you're a minority now. Andrew Scheer, just keep pounding on it. Keep pounding on it. Keep working with Scheer to improve his speaking. To get him a vocal coach. Get him a vocal coach. Because if you ask me, Pierre Poilievre's superpower is that he's extremely well spoken, and he looks the part. And so I don't necessarily know that it'll be specifically the Emergencies Act that'll sink Trudeau, but I do think Trudeau is sinking, and I don't think the Liberals are responding correctly. They're not responding the way Liberals should, right? Because the way that Liberals respond is through concessions bargaining. That's what they do. And the dental plan's not good enough. Straight up, it's just not good enough. I think it's like the most meager thing ever. That it's not meeting the scale of the crises that we're facing. That the populace is like at DEFCON 10. Like the populace is like all the time. And is doing everything they can to say that that's the truth. Right? 60% of Canadians are saying they can't pay their bills anymore. Right? Like and the Liberals are basically saying, like, yeah, we're going to go along with the NDP and give you dental care in 20 years. It's just not meeting the mustard. It's just not happening. And so I think the Liberals are in trouble. They're not responding rationally. I think people are seeing through Trudeau's act. I think Trudeau himself is tired of the act. Like, anytime I see Trudeau talking, you can see through it. He's acting. Like, he's not being a genuine person. He's acting. And then you listen to Pierre Poilievre, and even though I disagree with most of what he says, because it's just more Milton Friedman bullshit, he sounds like he believes it, and he sounds genuine, and people respond to that. So I think that we're going to go into an election where you have kind of a depleted Trudeau, who is no longer interested in bringing forward good ideas or thoughts, with a ghoulish deputy prime minister, honestly, and I think she already sees the writing on the wall. Chrystia Freeland, she already sees the writing on the wall. Like, she's talking about bouncing and becoming part of NATO, right? Like, that's something that she's already talking. So I think she already sees it happen, and she's the Conservatives are literally making fun of the Liberals because Chrystia Freeland said, we're going to have to cut spending elsewhere to pay for the spending that we're doing now. Which the Conservatives are basically like, that's what we say. That's our plan. That's our whole thing. So you're just agreeing with us. So why are you in power? Good question. Good question. And I just think that the populace is tired of looking at these Liberals and are not that interested in supporting a guy with a turban. Like again, it's the NDP thing that I've been saying the whole time. Like, Canadians are not going to vote for a guy with a turban. They're just not going to do it. So the NDP are going to lose this next election again. The Liberals are going to decline, and the Conservatives will probably become the government. Whether it's a minority or majority, we'll see. But Pierre Poilievre is very effective. He's very effective. I follow all of his socials. I follow all these guys' socials. And he is the most effective of them. For sure. For sure. Always look on the bright side of death just before you draw your terminal breath. Oh, beautiful. Sacrifice humanity, 1 million and counting. China's doing good, though, so there's that. Yeah, exactly. Hey, there needs to be somewhere in humanity that's actually trying. Taxation is theft. Taxation is not theft. Taxation itself as an idea is not theft. It's how those taxes are used where things become illegitimate, right? That if you were being taxed and then you got something for that, right, you would not think that taxation is theft. But in America, you don't get anything for it. And in Canada, you're getting less and less. So, like, if somebody comes and takes 30 to 40% of your paycheck and then says this is to bomb people in Palestine, you're going to say taxation is theft. But if somebody says we're going to come and take 30 to 40% of your paycheck and all of your health care is taken care of and you only work 20 hours a week, you're going to be like, oh, well, maybe this is less, maybe this is worth it, right? Hey, DM, how you doing, bud? John, do you think Bill C-22 will pass Parliament anytime soon? No. Or will it be buried at the bottom of the pile, eventually die when the new election is called? Yes. That's what I think. Like, I don't think that these Liberals are responding rationally. I don't think that they're very self-aware. And I think that I genuinely do think that most of them are fine if they lose this next election, right? Because, like, they're all going to go become corporate lobbyists. That's what's going to happen to all of them. right? That they're, when they get voted out, they're all going to turn around and become corporate lobbyists. That's what's going to happen to all of them. And I think that there's more than a couple of them that are going like, man, I can't wait for that corporate lobbyist job. Oh man, like when's the election? Oh, TikTok. Like I've been getting offers from like Exxon. I've been getting offers from Vanguard and all these guys. Man, like TikTok. Like come on, when's this next election so I can lose it and then really get a paycheck, right? So like, I think that the liberals are a depleted force, if they ever had energy in the first place, and the conservatives are going to come in, and the conservatives are something of a wild card in this regard, to be honest. Like it was Stephen Harper that put forward the Child Care Benefit Act. Like this is why I'm not like so like red alert when it comes to conservatives taking power, because like sure they're going to do shitty things, yeah. I expect it, right? Stephen Harper did shitty things, right? I expect it. But, like, have the liberals done anything that's as impressive as the child care benefit? Anybody? Like, what have they done that's as impressive as the child care benefit? Like, the CERB, if they had have actually implemented that and left it in place and been like, there it is now, that would have been very impressive. I would have been like, there you go. Here you are. Like here's a progressive modern idea that we can build a society on. Like this is a powerful thought that's going to resonate in our society for hundreds of years and be something that the world can look at and really think about. But they dismantled it. So, like, imagine if Stephen Harper implemented the child care benefit and then dismantled it. Like, that's essentially what these liberals did. And so, like, I genuinely think that the liberal period, like, Justin Trudeau's liberal period is essentially going to be seen as a complete waste. A complete waste. That Stephen Harper was a better prime minister. The Stephen Harper conservatives were better governors. And the liberals seem to just be in place to waste everybody's time. That's more or less what I think about them. Like, what have they done? Like, I'm not asking this rhetorically. I'm asking so that someone can challenge me. What I really want is a real liberal to actually say, well, we did this. And my response is always going to be, how is that even close to as impressive as the child care benefit? Like, the child care benefit is a legitimate policy that works and is powerful. It keeps children out of poverty. 100%. What have the liberals done? What? Weed legalization? Just a total fucking waste of everybody's time. And their entire existence shows that that's the case. We were super excited about the existence of Justin Trudeau and the Liberal parties. We popped them into a majority. They immediately didn't do anything they said they were going to do. Remember electoral reform? Oh man, I'm so glad that this is the last election that was first past the post. And since then, they've just been in a steady decline. Because the populace is basically like, oh. And the NDP, instead of actually capitalizing on this fake progressive fucking loser, instead of actually capitalizing on this, they go ahead and put somebody as the leader of their party that's fundamentally unelectable in Canada. Like, sorry, I'm not happy to say this. Like, I'm not sitting here being like gleefully saying this. I'm saying it because it's true. Jagmeet Singh is unelectable because he's wearing a turban. The electorate is we are a white supremacist society, right? Even when we're being nice about it. And sure, when we answer polls, we'll be like, yeah, I like Jagmeet Singh. He seems like a great guy. Click. Never gonna vote for him. Like, if Jagmeet Singh was a white dude by the name of Jason Singer, people would be like, yeah, let's go. But he's not. Or even if he was a brown dude with the name Jagmeet Singh, I think people will be like, yeah, all right. But he's not. Right? He's a brown dude with the name Jagmeet Singh with a beard down to here and a turban. And Canadians are just not going to do it. Which, incidentally, seems fine by the NDP. The NDP seem fine by that. Plague doesn't discriminate. I would argue that a million folks didn't deserve to die. Many of them certainly wasn't the kind who were just being petulant. Conton, I think what I'm trying to lead us towards in this conversation, right, is so where do we put the focus of our blame? Where is the focus of our ire, right? Like, what should our concern be? How should we think about that? If we're going to be disgruntled and if we're going to try to place blame, who should we place blame upon? And the impulse is to turn and point at things like the Freedom Convoy, at these protesters and all of this. Whereas I'm trying to say, no, I think that there's a larger issue at play. One that is systemic in nature. That essentially by pointing at the Freedom Convoy, we're playing into the hands of the individualists. And saying that they're individualizing their individualism. When they themselves are caught within a system and in a structure. And that we should analyze that system and turn the force of our ire on that. Instead of on the individuals who are just struggling in their own lives. And I say that while ostensibly agreeing with you. That, like, yeah, those people didn't deserve to die. But we don't deserve to be serfs. We don't deserve to live in a system that generates serfdom. And we don't deserve to live under a government that is trading lives for capitalist gains. That instead of creating systems where we are sequestered and protected, instead of creating delivery systems, instead of creating public health and safety issues, we basically were just told it was over, get back to work. You know? Bill C-22 will get some lip service, but in the end it will just die. I mean, we'll see, right? We'll see. It could... One of the things that I do definitely believe in is, like, some of the people who are in power are just clueless idiots. Right? That's all. They're just clueless idiots who don't know what's going on. They're just detached, right? And I genuinely think that some of these people, if they were actually confronted with what's actually happening in the disabled community and with the MAID system, I think that they would be appalled and shocked and it would raise their eyebrows, right? But they're not really incentivized to care. You know, they don't really care. And I think that they have so much heaped on their plate by the oligarchy that at what point are they going to turn their eye and actually look at this issue? Will they? Will it matter to them? We'll see. I don't think the Supreme Court needs much lobbying to do that at the moment. Yeah, no kidding. What, John, what are you saying to me? Start up, cash in, sell out, bro down. The 4-point method to make it by Eric Cartman. Fantastic. Fantastic. Hey, looking dizzy. Don't worry about it, dude. You're a beautiful person. Perhaps membership for a certain amount of contribution, a certificate of some kind. I don't know what you're even saying there, dude. No, sounds like theft. They did nothing to earn or facilitate a share of earning from my labor, which helps me stay financially sound and even succeeding. Okay, so we're getting into like the libertarian argument, right? To me, it's all about what do you buy? Like what is your income tax actually? What are your taxes actually getting you? And I more or less am of the opinion that income tax is probably the worst way to do it. That like how you'd actually want to create a system, like a cyclical system that sustains itself, would be to just go after the pools of wealth, right? Like where is the meaningless wealth generated, right? And we can measure that, right? Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, right? Like wealth pools, and Moreover, I'm of the opinion that it doesn't matter how you structure it. Eventually, there will be pooling wealth. It does happen. And previous systems, like monarchical systems, they literally just would like collapse the money supply and redistribute it. Like throughout medieval Europe, there was like a tally stick system where they would distribute these tally sticks into the populace. The populace would use them to trade and all this kind of stuff and get what they needed from local traders, all this. But eventually those tally sticks would begin to pool underneath certain groups, and so they would just collapse it and redistribute it. And and that creates a stable economy. And what we're doing is we're allowing that wealth to pool, and then we're venerating it and saying, oh, it's pooling because you're a genius. As opposed to, like, it's pooling because it's structurally going to happen that way. Like, we're not being very intelligent about this. And it's leading to a surefire collapse of the system, because one of the most effective ways to collapse an economy is to ensure nobody has any of the resource to maintain that economy, right? That's what we're seeing. And yeah, income tax is the worst. It only affects the lower working middle class the worst. Overtime for me is pointless because it might put me into a higher tax bracket, where overtime is taxed at 40%. Yeah, like no, I do agree with you that this method of taxation, like, I am not opposed to the concept of taxation itself, but like income tax is like, there's no reason to do it that way. Like, if we need to take money out of the economy, right? If we are going to do that, it is necessary to have a sustainable economy to tax wealth out of it, right? Or to tax money out of it, because ostensibly what the government is doing is creating money, funneling it in the direction that they want to funnel it, right? And then to balance that creation and have that, right, which is government spending, they need to tax out the same amount and destroy money, basically. That's what the government's actually doing. Like, the government's not like taking the money and then transferring it to someone else. They're literally creating money and destroying it. That's literally what they're doing. And it's just so, the way that we discuss all of this is so fucked up. It's so fucked up the way that we discuss any of this. Like, the whole balance the budget idea is so fucking stupid. The more you think about it, the dumber it gets, right? Like, essentially what they're saying is privatize everything. Like, that's essentially what they're saying. Because, and they're always about deficit spending. It's like, yeah, there's a deficit, right? But when you create a deficit, you also create a surplus. Like, when the government creates, let's say, $1 billion and then builds a hospital with it, and then takes $1 billion elsewhere and gets rid of it, right? Well, you ended up with a hospital, didn't you? Right? And so and now they need to maintain that hospital, and so that's going to create a deficit for a hospital. And essentially what these guys are saying by getting rid of the deficit is privatize that hospital. Let billionaires administer it and take care of it, and that'll somehow be better, right? Nobody talks about the deficit that the private sector creates. I'm saying that the system is wrong, that there's an inherent disincentive for common investment, but what I am at fault for is that I usually argue 2 points at the same time, and I'm guilty of that. It ain't right for the Canadian government to crack down, but it follows that I do think, for us, a worker dictatorship, it should not be off the table to do the same thing to disruptive wreckers. My way of seeing it is that a future government must have common investment, and we may run into counter-revolutionaries who won't be reasoned with. Essentially, by any means necessary, not every bratty protest requires rolling in the tanks. I mean, I feel like we're just entering a realm of, like, hypothetical situations, you know what I mean? Like, and odd little speculativeness. Like, the truth is that under any system and under any government, there's going to be people who are protesting. Like that is going to happen. And I think that my question, or what I'm attempting to really focus on, is not the validity of the protest, but the response by the structure of power. Right? Like, the validity of the protest is always going to be up for debate. But the response from the government should not be up for debate. That the response for the government should be negotiation and diplomacy. And I don't think that that's an extreme position, right? Like, it's, if you have a government in place, whether it's worker-owned, whether it's an oligarchy, I don't care. Pick whatever structure you like. Invent a structure. Make a structure. If the response from that structure isn't, oh, our citizens are protesting, we should talk about it and negotiate with them in an effort to try to discover if there is a common ground to be had. And then after doing so, if they are in fact doing this in bad faith, as you say, color revolutionaries, this kind of thing, then you can actually move forward on that. Like, I genuinely do think that if the liberals had to come out and tried to negotiate and tried to do diplomacy and then evoked the Emergencies Act, I would be talking differently about this. Like, I would be. Because there is such a thing as bad faith actors. There is such a thing as that. But that's not what happened. And so I don't understand why diplomacy has become a pariah. Why even the act of talking to one another is considered a capitulation. That seems to be something that's happening across the board in the West. That it certainly happened in the Ukraine crisis. Here we are in a situation that demands diplomacy. We need to sit down at the table and create a diplomatic solution. Like it's got to happen, right? And at some point it will happen. But the general opinion of the populace and the general opinion of the power structure seems to be that even sitting down at the table is treason. Like I just don't know how we expect to operate as adults in the world if this is the way we're going to be. That even the concept, and you see this, like how people talk about Stalin, the people who are dead set on treating communists as if they are the same as Nazis will say that because Stalin made the I forget the name of it, but the Miltrov Pact with Hitler that basically said it's a non-aggression pact. Let's not fight one another, right? That made them bed buddies and their allies, and the communists are the same as Nazis. When any reasonable person, any rational thinker would say, yeah, like the Soviets were doing diplomacy and negotiating with a force that they were afraid of and wanted to create a non-aggression pact, and they created an agreement to do so, just like all of the powers of Europe did. But we seem to think in the West that communication and talking itself is capitulation. And that's manifest itself in American politics between the Democrats and the Republicans. That even talking to each other is considered treason. I said nothing about diplomacy being a problem. I'm saying that maybe sometimes certain things are more important than whether a minority likes it or not. Okay, but what are you going to do? Like, what's the solution there then? Because if the solution is evoke the Emergencies Act and round people up and arrest them, then we're there. Like, that's what we're doing. And my complaint is that we did that without any conversation at all, without even talking to these guys. When overtime is 50% of current wage, so I get a 10% bump at the risk of getting my ass higher tax. At this point, I stopped doing overtime, just do my bare minimum 40, even though my current job offers infinite overtime. Yeah, like, you're preaching to the choir here, John. Like, I mean, the structure of the system is designed to destroy the middle class and to destroy it's to extract as much wealth as possible and then abandon it. That's what it is. That's what it is. And you're just kind of articulating the specifics of this, and that it doesn't matter how much more productive you become or how many more hours you do. The system is designed to ensure that you are capped and you'll never get any higher, on purpose, right? That's the point of it. That's why they're doing that, and that doesn't mean that the concept of taxation itself is theft. It just means you're ruled by an oligarchy, right? That's it. They've weaponized taxation. And they've ensured that they will maintain all of the power and that no one else will ever get any. Like, that's the way the structure is, and that's the way it works. And as long as we allow that paradigm to persist, then it doesn't matter what we do. Like, maybe you'll work enough to get a nicer house than the next guy, right? Like you'll have a nicer place to live in than somebody who is working in a McDonald's. Like, great, right? But that's the distinction. Like, that's it. Like, you're not going to be able to buy private islands. You're not going to be able to buy public figures. You know, you're not going to be able to buy politicians. Because the worst thing that the oligarchy, like, what the oligarchy absolutely does not want to see is they don't want to see citizens taking their money and actually investing their money in counter narratives to the narrative of the oligarchy. Like, how disastrous would it be if a bunch of people, hardworking people who were making a lot of money and had enough money to be able to fund other things, actually started to fund like an anti-Peterson, right? Somebody who's just like Jordan Peterson but the opposite, and is able to actually, through the force of and was actually able to get them on TV, was actually able to legitimize them. Well, they don't want that. So what are they going to do? They're going to put systems of taxation on you. They're going to put systems in place to ensure that you can never get that. And they're going to convince you that the only way you are a better person than anybody else is by having the bigger house, which costs more, by having the bigger car, which costs more. And so all of the extra wealth that you generate for yourself, instead of sending it into alternative pursuits, you're just buying stuff from them. Right? That's it. That's why, like, when 60% of the populace says they're struggling to pay their bills, that includes people who are also quite wealthy, because those wealthy people have taken their extra wealth and turned around and bought a bigger house and bought a bigger car and bought more, and have taken that money and spent it on larger things. And so when the inflation happens and when this kind of stuff happens, they go, oh shit, I'm looking at my bills, and yes, I'm getting a larger paycheck in, but a larger paycheck's going out. May I suggest we consult the greatest diplomacy by... Oh, we're gonna be talking about Kissinger. Eric, good to see you, bud. We're gonna be using Kissinger as a fucking... You know things are desperate when fucking Henry Kissinger is walking around saying maybe we should do some diplomacy. Like, you know things are really fucking desperate when we're doing that. Here is an article. I want to read this article. Renewables are reducing emissions, so let's ramp up the pace of change. A recent report from the International Energy Agency says global emission targets this year will increase by 1% compared to 2020's by 6%. And that this is mainly due to the widespread adoption of renewable energies and the increasing popularization of electric vehicles. The news provides hope with respect to humanity's decarbonization goals. Last year was a disaster, with a post-pandemic recovery from the lockdowns and cutbacks of 2020 leading to much higher energy needs. which in many cases were obtained through coal-fired plants, producing more than 2 billion tons of carbon emissions, the largest annual increase in absolute terms in history. In 2021, renewables made up 10% of total power generation, a record, but clearly still insufficient. This year's slowdown comes despite being in the midst of a global energy crisis triggered by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and soaring oil and gas prices. The reason is that the increase in energy demand is not being offset by coal, diesel, and gas consumption, but by growing renewable energy installations. Tensions with Russia have focused minds on achieving higher levels of energy independence, specifically onshore and offshore wind farms, and, on the other hand, solar power farms and solar home installations, which result in lower stresses on the generation fabric. While solar and wind power make up the bulk of the gap in demand, the small increase in coal consumption in some countries is clearly a cyclical issue, especially given the lack of interest generated by such a high-cost energy in the face of increasingly cheaper renewables. Since 2020, renewables have been by far the cheapest form of power generation. This year, the capacity contributed by new renewable energy installations reached a total of 700 TWh, representing savings in emissions of more than 600 million tons of carbon dioxide. Growth in solar and wind accounted for 2/3 of new renewable capacity, while hydropower, having had a bad year due to major droughts around the world, offset the remaining third. In the United States alone, renewables contributed 25% of the total in the first half of the year and accounted for 71% of new power installations between January and July. It is time for truth, to put an end to myths that have been peddled for too long and to understand that the world is in the midst of an unstoppable renewable energy revolution. By 2026, 95% of the increase in installed capacity will come from renewable energies. Theoretically, the planet could be able to supply itself with 100% renewable electricity by 2030, and to do so with much lower storage requirements than initially anticipated. Germany aims to achieve this by 2035, and many other countries are also aiming for similar targets. But beyond the climate emergency goals, we now also know that moving away from fossil fuels is something that could realistically be done and earn back its investment in as little as 6 years, generating global savings of $12 trillion. Decarbonization is an urgent need, but we now also know that it is possible and that we are on the right track. We just need to understand the gravity of the situation, to imagine a world without the smoke of fossil fuels in the air, and to take the necessary steps to achieve that faster and faster. We can do it. It's nice to know that there are people who are being positive out there, who are trying, God bless them, to believe in the idea that we can make this transition and be successful at it. I don't know why we are struggling with this concept of pollute less. Just stop polluting. Like, not everything we are doing needs to be done. Like, just look at Times Square. Just look at Times Square, and you'll realize really fast that not all of the energy we are using needs to be used. I'm as critical of China, by the way, of this. Like, their cities are lit up, and I'm just like, is all of that being done through renewable energy? Probably not. Probably not. And seems like even as we are trying to make this shift and make this move, we're simultaneously refusing to confront the forces that are polluting the most. And that's the military. Like, that's the military. We're all like, rah-rah, Ukraine. Well, rah-rah, Ukraine is polluting everything. The transfer of arms doesn't happen with zero cost. So it'd be really nice, wouldn't it? That'd be really great. It would be really great if suddenly there were reports coming out that were like, we did it. We turned the corner. We made it happen. We're returning to sustainable levels of pollution, of carbon emission. The carbon emissions are going down. That, I think, would be really great. It'd be really great to live in a world that was actually attempting to rationally respond to these crises. Maybe it'll happen. But not with articles like this. Global real estate downturn can kill growth. Like, we're so growth focused. We're so just like hyper into this idea that we can infinitely grow forever. And we just can't. We just can't. We just can't infinitely grow forever. And you see it coming out of conservative place, especially in the UK. You see a big narrative being that, oh, it's the degrowth people. They want a degrowth. And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, of course. Pollute less. Do less. Like, why are we so hyper-focused on this idea of growth when it's growth that's what's killing us? It's like we're saying smoke less cigarettes. And they're literally... And, I mean, Adam, you're bringing up an interesting point. I follow doomers who argue that emissions are not down and that GHG emissions are up 1% from 2021 to 2022. No, that is true. Emissions are... The argument that's coming out of the positivity crowd isn't that emissions are going down. It's that they're going up slower, right? So that's true, that greenhouse gas emissions are up, but they're not up by 10%. They're up by 1%. And we're so behind the curve, and we're so desperate for any kind of positive narrative to come out, and anything that we can look at that will say maybe the apocalypse won't happen, that we are willing to accept, oh, we only increased it by 1% instead of 10%. And we're willing to say that that's a victory. Right? Like, that's where we're at. And then maybe next year we'll actually say, oh, hey, it went down. Hey, look, it went down a little bit. Isn't that great? We'll see. We'll see. I don't want this channel to turn exclusively into like a doom and gloom doomerism kind of thing. That if somebody's going to produce an article that has a positive aspect, I think that we should read it and we should listen to it, and because I actually think it is possible. Well, I say it all the time. I think that we can do it. I think that we can do it, and I'll always believe that we can do it, right? And the reason why I believe that we can do it isn't because we're clever or smart or we'll make new technology or any of that, but that the Earth is fully capable of healing itself. I say this all the time. The Earth is perfectly capable of healing itself, thank you very much. Like, we didn't create the garden. Like, we didn't make the garden that was the Earth that we were spawned into. Like, we didn't create any of that. The Earth did that all by itself, thank you very much. And so this idea that we're going to destroy the planet and make it we're going to kill the planet, no, I don't think so. We're going to kill ourselves. Like, that's what we're going to do. We're going to kill ourselves. But the Earth is going to heal itself. It's perfectly capable of it. And we just have... I actually think that we're being kind of dumb about all of this. Like, that what we should do as a people is acknowledge the power of the Earth. Which is obvious. Like, and this isn't like a spiritual, like, the Gaia energy of the planet or any of that shit. Like, this is straight up just the material reality and the material facts. Like, we live in a generative system that's capable of regenerating itself. You can see it. Like, we should just stop doing what we're doing and allow it to do it. And stop pretending like what we're doing has any validity. Because it doesn't. Like, where's the validity of what we're doing? Like, why do we believe that what we're doing has any value and is working? Because it obviously isn't. Like, living standards are down, life expectancy is down, birth rates are in decline. Like, this system has obviously failed. Like, and it's going to get, like, really fucking obvious. So obvious that anytime anybody produces an article or produces something that tries to pretend as though everything's fine, we'll view them like Nazis. I mean, I already do, but the rest of the populace will as well, because it'll get that obvious. And we just need to stop fucking around with this. We need to acknowledge the power of the system that we're in, which is the Earth, and just let it do its thing. Because it could literally solve this problem for us if we just fucking stopped doing what we were doing. It's kind of bonkers, actually. Yeah, because we keep electing these fucking idiots. We keep electing people like fucking Doug Ford, who's literally like, yeah, just clear cut the place so we can put condos down. Sure, there's 1 million empty units, but we need more, so we're going to clear cut. Those 700 green energy programs, let's get rid of those. That wasn't Ontario's new economy that was going to come out, and by 2035 we were going to have a big, robust economy that was actually going to be strong in the world. Nope, all that needs to go. Chinese hoax.
You know, the thing about climate change is, you can't really measure it because when you say the word climate, you really mean everything, and you can't measure everything because if you just measure everything, then it just goes into abstraction forever.
Shut up. Like, I just feel like I'm listening to, like, baby babble at this point. Like it really is like our society is, like, Joe Biden is absolutely the perfect person. Sure, Eric, get in the Discord, okay, bud? Joe Biden is absolutely the perfect person, the absolute perfect person to be the leader of the country right now, right? Because he has dementia. And so he's absolutely the perfect icon and the perfect person to represent our what we are and who we are, right? Like, he's the baby boomer generation. While I'm pretty forgiving of the baby boomer generation, because they were the first people to really get inflicted with propaganda. They were the first people to get really inflicted by television propaganda, right? Like, many of them are just never going to turn the corner, right? And so we're just witnessing a society that's falling into literal dementia. And the people who have the most power are just demented. And we kind of just need to wait for these people to die off. And the Earth seems to be agreeing with that. That, oh, the issue is that we have a bunch of demented people who have all the wealth and power and keep voting for demented individuals. Well, let's just keep sending plagues in until they all die. DM, you're here. Oop. Did I accidentally kick you, DM? I worry that I accidentally just kicked you, bud. Come back in if that's the case. Well, I'm here waiting for anybody to talk to. Baby boomers clean their rooms, bucko. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, dude. Like, and isn't that just the most childish part of it? That, like, the narrative has gotten so childish that the baby boomers are literally defending themselves by saying, like, just clean up your room. Like, that's literally where they're at. instead of acknowledging that they are like the beneficiaries of enormous government programs. Like the baby boomers are walking around saying, I don't want to, no government handouts, when they are the primary beneficiaries of massive government handouts. Earbud. Let's get the... I should have done this in the first place. Oops. Hitting the wrong button. Should have done that in the first place. Yeah, when we see, like, people, I don't see how we look back on the Jordan Peterson period with anything other than, like, this kind of head shaking. Like, imagine what it's going to be like for, like, a 19-year-old who really bought into Jordan Peterson and that, like, JP was their daddy, who, when they turn 30, goes and listens to this guy again. Like, I really think you're going to get a lot of people just being like, oh my fucking God. Like how people who thought Sam Harris was smart. You know, I've encountered a lot of people who are like, yeah, I was really into Sam Harris. And then they grew up, you know? Then they grew up and they became like, oh shit, like that guy's like a brutal racist. Like, amongst the most brutal racists who has ever been given a public platform. Like, his if you read Letter to a Christian Nation, his Islamophobia, like what the statements that Sam Harris makes about Muslims are as bad as anything that was ever written by, like, the Confederates in the South. Like, just brutal, overt racism. Like, overt racism. Like, as bad as the cartoonish depictions of black people with, like, the big lips and the nose and the jive dancing and all of that. Like, really, really vicious stuff that comes out of Sam Harris. And yet we were all supposed to be like, yeah, that's exactly right. Muslims are exactly like that. That's normal. Like, woof. And, you know, when you're 19 and stupid and you don't know any better, you know, you can just sort of glance by that. But when you get older and wiser and you read Letter to a Christian Nation, you're like, holy shit. Like, this is fucking gross. Because Harris is gross. Of that batch, of the new atheists, like, I have a respect for Chris Hitchens, even though I don't agree with some of the stuff that he said, but I think that's normal. I don't agree with everything that everybody says. I don't agree with everything that Hitchens does, but Hitchens, I think, was legitimate and defended himself and would change his mind. Dennett was very smart and clever, well-researched. Dawkins, at the time, I think, was decent, even though a lot of what he said, like, the selfish gene has been discredited. It's not, it was an idea, but it no longer stands. And he also has, like, a little bit of, like, the Islamophobic kind of aspect to it. But Harris was just overt. Just obviously, like, trying to justify nuclear first strikes, torture, overt, over-the-top racism. Like, crazy stuff. All right, Eric, welcome back. How you doing today, bud?
Mally isn't wanting anything.
Hey, actually, I have to go right now. I'll be right back. Something just came up.
You bet. Well, if anybody else wants to dive in there. I know, DM, you were there for a minute and then you left, so I don't know what that was about. Green tech could be good for electricity demand, but that does not solve the 80% problem, which is that 80% of our energy demands are from fossil fuels, mainly used for transport and industrial processes. Yeah, I think you're right, Adam. Like, I'm not trying to pretend that we're not facing, like, a major crisis. No, the truth of the fossil fuel, like there's so much, we've got so much hubris tied up into it, eh? Like there's just so much just absolute crazy humanity. Oh, sure, we haven't done the David Lynch draw. Why not? Why not? How many people we got watching right now? We got 6 people. I expect to see. I mean, planned obsolescence, sure. But honestly, like if you're going to do away with planned obsolescence, you're going to have to do away with capitalism itself.
Here we go for today's number.
The
It's
reason why planned
October
obsolescence
26,
exists is because
2022.
All right, I'm going
10 balls.
with a 2.
Each
I'm
ball
feeling a
has
2.
a number.
Here we go.
Numbers 1 through 10.
Here we go.
Swirl the numbers.
Roll the numbers. Here we go.
Pick a number.
Pick a number. What do we got? 2.
Today's
Big
number
2.
is
1.
1.
What a tease. What a tease number. Total fucking bullshit. Total fucking bullshit. Robbery. That's what that is. That's highway robbery. What just happened to me? Oh well. Oh well. Nobody won. We're all losers. Yeah. Yep. From the New York Times. Climate pledges are falling short, and a chaotic future looks more like reality. With annual summit next month, the United Nations assesses progress on countries' past emissions commitments. Severe disruptions would be hard to avoid on the current trajectory. Countries around the world are failing to live up to their commitments to fight climate change, pointing Earth towards a future marked by more intense flooding, wildfires, drought, heat waves, and species extinction, according to a report issued Wednesday by the United Nations. Just 26 of 193 countries that agreed last year to set up their climate actions have followed through with more ambitious plans. The world's top 2 polluters, China and the United States, have taken some action but have not pledged more this year, and climate negotiations between the two have been frozen for months. Without drastic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, the report said, the planet is on track to warm by an average of 2.1 to 2.9 degrees Celsius, compared with pre-industrial levels by 2100. That's far higher than the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius set by the landmark Paris Agreement in 2015, and it crossed the threshold beyond which scientists say the likelihood of catastrophic climate impacts significantly increases. With each fraction of a degree of warming, tens of millions more people worldwide would be exposed to life-threatening heat waves, food and water scarcity, and coastal flooding, while millions more mammals, insects, birds, and plants would disappear. Wednesday's report comes less than 2 weeks before nations are set to gather at UN climate talks in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, to discuss unfulfilled promises and take stock of the fight to stave off environmental catastrophe. But war in Europe, an international energy crisis, global inflation, and political turmoil in countries like Britain and Brazil have distracted leaders and complicated cooperative efforts to tackle climate change. On Monday, the European Union said it would increase its emissions reductions pledges as soon as possible, but could not do so until its member states agreed on a number of upcoming climate laws. That delay is hugely disappointing, said Nicholas Hohn, founder of New Climate Institute in Cologne, Germany. This year, we've seen little of the climate action governments promised at the end of Glasgow, amid a deluge of new science telling us that we have to move faster and that limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is still entirely possible. We need governments to set strong targets that drive emissions down and decarbonize their economies. At last year's Global Climate Summit in Glasgow, countries pledged to redouble their efforts to cut the emissions from burning oil, gas, and coal that are dangerously heating the planet. They also agreed to increase funding for technologies to help developing economies transition away from fossil fuels to wind, solar, and other renewable energy sources. The United Nations report analyzed the commitments made by countries to cut their emissions, known as Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs. Countries that signed the 2015 Paris Agreement promised to update and strengthen their commitments every 5 years. The 2020 meeting was postponed a year because of the coronavirus pandemic. In 2021, acknowledging the urgency of the climate crisis, nations agreed not to wait another 5 years, and instead pledged to make new commitments before the climate talks that begin November 7th in Egypt. Taryn Fraser, a fellow at the World Resources Institute, a research organization, called the current trajectory of global temperature increase dangerously high. China, currently the world's biggest emitter of greenhouse gases, is one of the major holdouts on new commitments, though it did submit a new pledge before last year's summit in Scotland. China has said its carbon dioxide emissions will continue to grow until they peak by 2030, but it has not set targets for reducing other greenhouse gases, such as methane, which it emits in amounts large enough to equal the total emissions of smaller nations. Last year, China said it would stop building coal-burning power plants overseas. As of August, 26 out of 104 such projects have been shelved, preventing 85 million tons of carbon dioxide from being added each year into the atmosphere, according to the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. An analysis by the World Resource Institute found that current promises by nations would reduce global greenhouse gas emissions around 7% from 2019 levels, even though 6 times that, a reduction of 43%, would be necessary to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Of the major economies, we have seen a few countries update this year. India formalized its commitments. Australia updated theirs when they got a new government in place. Indonesia followed through, said Ms. Franzen of the World Resources Institute. But each of these countries have failed to update their NDCs until now, so they're making up for lost time. The United States, in passing the Inflation Reduction Act, which contains hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies for cleaner technologies, has jumped forward in its ability to make good on its promise to cut emissions by between 50 and 51% below 2005 levels by the end of this decade. But the new law will still only get the United States about 80% of the way to its current pledge to cut emissions, Ms. Frazen said. Mr. Hone said the United States new law was the strongest move made by a major emitter in 2022, but was 30 years overdue. Both the war in Ukraine, which upended global energy markets, as well as an unrelenting spate of climate calamities, such as ruinous flooding in Pakistan and Nigeria, and record droughts in the Horn of Africa and China, will loom over this year's climate summit, known as the Conference of Parties, or COP27. The gathering in Egypt is expected to focus on whether wealthy nations that have emitted most of the carbon dioxide that is driving climate change should compensate poor countries that have not contributed significantly to the problem and are the least prepared for its impacts. Though an agreement on compensation is unlikely to be reached, the topic is expected to make it onto the conference's formal agenda for the first time. Lesser developed and low-lying island nations will press for compensation to be formalized through the creation of an international fund where they could submit claims of climate change-related loss and damage. The United States, Europe, and other wealthy countries have opposed the creation of such a fund, in part because they fear being held legally liable for skyrocketing disaster costs. The release of the UN report provoked grumbling from those in the developing world who are quick to point out that of the few countries that strengthened their pledges this year, most are not heavy polluters. The latest UN report once again shows that those most responsible for the climate crisis remain unwilling to face up to their responsibilities.
said Mo Ibrahim, of Sudanese British businessman turned philanthropist, who has convened African leaders to discuss the climate crisis ahead of the summit in Egypt. Unless urgent action is taken to hold richer countries to account, the developing world will continue to foot the bill at the cost of numerous lives. On Tuesday, The Lancet, one of the world's leading health journals, published a report highlighting the growing threat of fossil fuels to human health. The report raised concerns not only about the direct health consequences of rising temperatures, including heat-related mortality, pregnancy complications, and cardiovascular disease, but also the indirect costs, including the effects that drier soil could have on malnutrition, and how a changing climate can expand habitats suitable to mosquitoes that carry Dengue fever or malaria, ticks that carry Lyme disease, and the pathogens that cause disease like cholera and valley fever. We see how climate change is driving severe health impacts all around the world, while the persistent global fossil fuel dependence compounds these health harms amidst multiple global crises, said Marina Romanello, executive director of the Lancet Countdown, in a statement. John Kerry, President Biden's climate envoy, called on China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Mexico, as well as other leading economies, to align their climate policies with the goal of constraining global warming to 1.5 degrees. We all know the top 20 economies are responsible for the 80% of emissions, Mr. Kerry said during a speech Tuesday at the Council on Foreign Relations. Their pledges should be strengthened this year, he said. That's what people agreed to do, he said. It takes all to get the job done. And then the Republicans will come in and blow the whole thing up. Real simple as that. Because people are climate change deniers, right? Oh, Eric, you want to pop in? Say hello? We got 40 minutes left on the clock, or 20 minutes rather, left on the clock. Let's have a conversation. What's going on, Eric? Hello?
Can you hear me?
A little. Oh, Eric having technical difficulties. Okay, Eric. I think I'm going to move on, bud. Sorry, Eric. Better luck next time. I've only got 20 minutes left on the clock here. Let's do the rapid fire. I got a bunch of articles here. Let's just go down the list and knock them out. Bank of Canada increases policy interest rate by 50 basis points. Continues quantitative tightening. Fuck them. We've already done that. This is potentially going to cost thousands of affordable rentals, as a city staffer warned us about these projections. All of the Jameson apartment buildings could be torn down for condos. So here in the city of Toronto, we're literally going to tear down apartment buildings to build condos. Isn't that great? Aren't we the greatest? Record volumes of Russian energy heading to China. That's from Bloomberg. Overall exports have surged to over 50 billion since February. News outlet reports citing Chinese customs data. So this strengthens and tightens the relationship between Russia and China, right? Russia, instead of sending its gas towards Europe, is now just going to send it towards China. Good move on that war, by the way, EU. Well done. Smart move, NATO. You did it. You alienated somebody and chased them into the hands of the Chinese. Good job. Good fucking job. Yeah, I love this headline because it's so funny. Ontario's foreign homebuyers tax is now the highest in Canada. Yeah, we care about housing prices. Look, we're going to put a big tax on foreign homebuyers. So foreigners can't come and buy houses, and certainly are incapable of creating domestic shell companies in order to do it for them. Like, that's been the laughable part about that whole narrative. We're definitely doing something. Look, foreign home buyers tax. Yeah, because nobody can create a domestic shell company. Like, fucking, come on. Already did that. Don't need to do that. Oh, yeah. Canada propped up Venezuelan AstroTurf group linked to crumbling interim government, notes confirm. Just another huge L from these fucking loser liberals, right? Like, straight up,
Juan Guaido and his stupid interim government and this whole idea, we're just like, yeah, we just love to give money to them, right? Like we're literally just backing coups. The opposition leader then led a failed military coup, right? Dude, I only got 15 minutes. Forgot about it. I'm also feeling like really tough in my chest right now. Premier Doug Ford, who is summoned to testify in front of the Emergencies Act inquiry on November 10th, will take the commission to court on November 1st. Here's the argument the Premier is making. Basically, Doug Ford doesn't want to testify in the Emergencies Act inquiry, and his argument is essentially, this is a federal issue, not a provincial one. I don't need to be involved. Even though he's the Premier of the province that the Emergencies Act was invoked upon. Like, what a coward this guy is. Like, not just a total fucking loser. Like, the reason why Ontario's economy is going to be worthless in the future, right? The reason why we can't actually get anything done. But also just incapable of even standing up and being and taking responsibility. Like, Doug Ford's a massive loser, and anybody who votes for him is just a massive loser. But they're the ones with the biggest houses, so they're the best people. It's really what we are in. Yeah, exactly. Regarding the housing story, did you see some property owners will be allowed to build and have 3 different units? Yeah, more landlords. Let's go. And also, like, have 3 different units on a single property. So shittier housing, basically, right? That you'll take a place that's meant to be for one person and break it into 3, and be like, that's good, like, and then just jack the rent up and pretend as though that this is normal. Like, we're such a fail state, man. It's an enormous failure. Don't need that. Already did that. Don't need that. Yep. Toronto low-income housing programs brace for cuts. So even like budget projections from Toronto's Shelter Support and Housing Administration anticipate steep funding cuts from the city, even as the same document notes more and more people in the city are experiencing chronic homelessness. Normal society. Not fascist at all. No fascism here. We're just systemically abandoning the poor and the homeless in a process of extraction and abandonment, right? These loser surrogates like John Tory are just watching people get thrown into homelessness. Yeah, fuck landlords. Yeah. Like, we should dismantle the system. I mean, we should have a full-scale revolution, but, you know. Oh, that's extreme. Yeah, UN warns time is running out as greenhouse gases surge. I think what's interesting about this, like, I just read that article I just read comes from the New York Times. This article comes from Reuters. You get the sense of desperation, eh? Like, you get the sense of desperation that even the media power structure is starting to go like, oh shit, like, this could actually be serious. Like, oh, we were fucking around for like 20, 30 years there, trying to pretend like it's a both sides issue. And, oh, yeah, definitely this oil representative is the same as a PhD scholar, right? Like, and now there's going to be actual, like, serious shit's going to happen. Serious shit has already happened, and more serious shit is going to happen. And you can see the desperation within the media to try to legitimize themselves again. To try to be like, yeah, let's report on what the UN says instead of ignoring it like we did for 40 years. For literally 40 years, these guys were like, well, the UN says this, but ExxonMobil says this, and that's the same. And they think they have credibility or legitimacy. And so all of this just smacks with, like, total desperation. to try to reclaim a lost credibility that they'll never get. Like, they'll never get. And if they actually did regain the attention of the public, all they'll do is betray it again. That's what they do, right? That's how it works. They're not interested in telling you the truth. They're interested in serving their masters. And it's just that their masters are getting desperate too. Because now their masters are going like, oh, fuck, yeah, like, if everybody dies, then who will buy our products? Because that's all that really fucking matters. I love it, man. The BBC. Inflation. Why Canada grocers are accused of greedflation. Love that headline, eh? Like, instead of saying Canadian grocers jacking prices like the thieves they are, right? It's inflation. Why Canada grocers are accused of greedflation. As if they're not completely guilty of just inflating prices on purpose. Like, if you ask me, like, landlords are bad, but at least that's like a structural, systemic thing. Literally, this issue is just jacking prices because you can. Like, I hope I'm alive for a revolution, dude. I really do. Like, I hope I'm alive to see, like, a generation of, like, 18 and 19-year-old kids recognize that they're in a failed state, that their state has failed and is incapable of responding rationally. I hope I'm alive to see it. Because, like, what I'm watching now is just so pathetic. Just like a pathetic group of losers who refuse to get off the couch and fucking go do anything about anything. Like, I'm literally trying to organize protests and trying to get people out in the streets and trying to galvanize energy and trying to do that kind of stuff. And it just looks like the response is like, yeah. We're all trying our best. We're all trying our best. God damn it. Methane super emitters mapped by NASA's new Earth space mission. Right? This image shows a methane plume 2 miles long that NASA's Earth surface mineral dust source investigation mission detected southeast of Carlsbad, New Mexico. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas that's much more effective at trapping heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. Isn't that cool? Like, we literally have satellite imagery of our demise. Right? Here's east of Hazard, Turkesmania, a port city. Here's 12 plumes of a methane stream. I feel like just getting into a place where we're like super cool. Okay, guys, I'm a little early on this, but I've run out of road, and I'm also feeling a little tight in the chest. It's getting tough to talk, so I'm gonna call it tonight. Always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.